I'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
I see advertisements.
Okay, it looks like we're live.
Sure.
Yeah, I see it.
We're live.
Hey.
Hey, Internet. How y'all doing? We are just getting settled in.
Dave will be here in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to everyone for joining us, and hey to all of you guys.
Cheers.
I like that our cup paste. For a second, it looked like a candle or something.
Just sipping
World
on
market,
a candle.
Oh yeah, is that ice in the middle?
I think I've broke more than I've. Yeah, I think I've broke more than I've bought.
Okay.
But I don't even know
Just from my angle,
the math works out on that.
it looked like a tea light, like in a like you're drinking the wax or something.
Definitely. I mean,
Love that
one day.
wax.
So, everybody maybe catch a nap. I tried, it didn't work.
Nope.
I guess we could sleep
Just
on
got
it.
home from work and kind of hopped on here.
Well, it's been a long couple of days, a week at this point, I think.
Yeah, a week.
It's,
I think it's a week.
Well, okay, so I mean, we've got 5,000 subscribers. We'll visit that in a minute officially.
Yeah, so this can I just say quickly, this live was scheduled for some weeks now, and originally was supposed to be a lot more jovial and lighthearted, but we're having to adjust due to recent events and a lot of controversy that's been kicked up. So we're still going to be addressing the questions that the 5K celebration questions that we got. But after that, we're going to talk a bit about the controversy surrounding our reporting and video on Dr. Martin W. Ball.
Yeah. And, there's been quite a bit of back and forth across multiple platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube right here, Instagram, and, it's been vigorous.
It's been trench warfare for the last for the last week. What's today? 25th, 6 days.
I meant threads as trench.
Yeah.
last Friday.
I mean, Godwin's law is in effect. We've been compared to Nazis pretty recently. So, so we'll get into some of that towards the end. But we wanted to, keep with some semblance of normalcy and actually address the the questions that we know people have been wondering about, general questions, things that we have been having the works.
Yeah, we get a bunch of questions to go through. I don't know if we have answers to all of them, but we'll go through them. Dave will be with us in a minute.
And Angela Ward in chat says the psychedelic internet blew up after your video this week. So I feel like that's
they did.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, I would say.
And Angela's been awesome on socials too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been wild to see, where people sort of come down on these issues. It's not our first rodeo on, I don't know, honestly, from our perspective, sort of clear-cut cases of admissions of mistreatment of others. And so, some of these dynamics are things that we're rather familiar with, but this was a bit more than I think any of us really expected. Particularly,
Alan's asking if we can give a recap. Alan.
Oh yeah, we should give a TLDR. That's true.
Yeah. Who wants to give it?
I'll start at least. Feel free to chime in. It started when I was surfing around on the internet and I came across Dr. Ball's talk. And
Did someone not send it to you? I thought you said someone sent it to you. You just happened upon it.
Yeah, so I actually happened upon it in
He sent it to me.
Right.
Well,
I happened upon it in a Reddit thread. And just click through. At symposia, we have discussed, we are aware of Dr. Ball. We know that we were well aware that he was the forward writer of the manual for psychedelic guides.
And along with that, he's the guy yelling about Octavio Rettig at
Right.
the 2018 psychedelic conference. That was kind of my first intro to him.
So we
maybe
sort of
we should
kept
do just
tabs.
a quick, because it's like he's specifically well known and has been well known in the community for as long as I've been around, as a prominent 5-MeO-DMT facilitator, practitioner. He says he's retired now, that we have no reason to believe otherwise. But he was very active for some years and has published a lot of books on the subject. And he's also well known as the convener of the Exploring Psychedelics conference that was held for some years at Southern Oregon University. And he was an adjunct professor in Ashland, Oregon. So he's very prominent in the Pacific Northwest, especially. A lot of people there, if you're in the psychedelic communities, going to the kind of psychedelic society meetings, etc., you've likely either run into him or to someone who knows him. And so it's kind of, he's tight knit amongst certain, but he also has a reputation that preceded our reporting as being someone who there were some kind of problematic things around. So that's just for him. And then maybe a TLDR for Hayden as well, because you talked about the guide, but for people who don't know, it might be helpful just to explain that.
Sure. So, Mark Hayden is the former executive director of MAPS Canada, which is an NGO up there doing work with MAPS.
I believe he's still there. He announced his resignation, and they're in the process of hiring a new ED. Right,
but as I suppose his swan song, he has recently published with significant help and contributions from Dr. Ball, this manual for psychedelic guides. So it is specifically an instructional guide explicitly for psychiatrists, therapists, shamanic practitioners. And, it's a pretty straightforward instructional guide that Martin Ball wrote the foreword for. So we were aware of that, all of that actually, before I alerted the team to the vile comments of Dr. Ball at a Los Angeles medicinal plant society meeting in 2016. So, that's the TLDR on that situation. Do we want to kick things off with the Q&A now and then revisit that in the second hour, or second half?
Yeah, so
I think that would be good.
Yeah,
otherwise we'll get sucked into this.
Yeah, that's true. What I was trying to get to. So
I just want to say to Alan, if you go on our Twitter thread, there's a video at the top of Twitter. You can watch that. You can read the article that's on the top of our homepage right now and kind of get a quick idea of what we're talking about.
Gotcha. Yeah, so let's pull up these questions. We submitted these via mailer and Twitter.
And folks are also welcome to comment questions live in chat. And we can get to those after the pre-submitted questions.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, again, the questions don't have to be related to anything super topical or political. It can be whatever, whatever questions you have.
It's an AMA here.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Starbuck from Patreon. Any sneak peeks into upcoming projects for symposia you're excited about? Anybody want to take that?
The answer is yes, and the answer is yes, in caps. But we probably don't want to talk about it.
Well, I
I
think
guess
there's
around
one.
it.
I
Well,
guess
there's
that's
one.
my answer.
There's some things we don't want to go into because, yeah, kind of under wraps while things are in process. But we do have some longer term kind of areas that we're going into because Pace brought up the idea that, I don't know, some of you, if you follow Double Blind, for example, you might see that there are these courses you can pay for to learn how to grow mushrooms, etc. And
or make mushroom tea.
Yeah. And we're interested in kind of like doing like video and content around the commons of psychedelia that's been on the internet and things that people have shared and different sites and forums that have been part of the community. Because one of our interests is topical current events like politics and, you know, problematic things that need to be fires that need to be put out. But we're also really interested in, because we come from the community and we're not like corporate people, you know, where people have been involved in some capacity. And so sharing the history of the community, especially as there's newcomers coming into the space, and like kind of talking about the people who've been here, different contributions that have been made, is one area that we haven't yet kind of developed, but is in the process for the future.
Yeah, definitely. Like, so, you know, putting spotlights on, work that has already been done, that's been put into, as Nishay was saying, that, you know, the commons, and really just sort of walking through some of the oral history of psychedelia in some ways, you know. And so that's going to be an ongoing multi-platform project. So you'll see it on Twitter, you'll see it, elements of it on YouTube, I'm sure, Facebook, obviously. And then, you know, generally speaking, as I think anybody who's caught us here has already noticed, you know, we're putting more like effort and resources into producing video content. And so that includes these regular live streams, obviously. And, you know, we are releasing our backlog of podcasts, but also more topical stuff.
Can we share the one that you and I are making?
I think we can share that one.
Okay. Yeah. So Pace and I, having both, Pace is actively teaching a psychedelic studies course at Ohio State University. I have taught psychedelic studies courses at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Puget Sound, and Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. So because of that experience, we're making a how to get psychedelic studies at your school video to kind of help kind of give tips of how to kind of organize to create a psychedelic studies class, who to talk to, what kinds of things to say, and courses to align yourself with, stuff like that. So
navigating the bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, it's advice for both students and you know, faculty who have an interest in these topics but aren't really sure, you know, and hopefully the skills to you know, talk about them in a cogent manner, but how, you know, to bring up that topic and deal with it in a professional manner. So you can look forward to that at some point. So yeah, I think that's probably, you know, a nice sneak peek.
I can talk about one more very vague thing, or without going too much into detail, but Nishay and I have been working on something in the background too that's just digging into some underrepresented voices in a kind of huge piece of psychedelic history around like Picard and Todd Skinner and stuff. And I've been really happy working on that. So I don't want to say much more than that because we don't know how it's going to be released, and I don't really want to talk about the subject, but but yeah, that's about all I'll say on that.
So kind of the stories behind the stories that you know, people have heard about, but maybe aspects that they haven't been exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
What do we got next?
Also from Patreon, we have Maya. Says, are there any for-profit psychedelic corporations that seem to be doing things more ethical no sketchy patents, a willingness to share information with competitors, promoting diversity, recognizing contributions of indigenous people to the space, etc., that other for-profit psychedelic corporations could model against or nah. I think this question is more Dave and Russell and Ryan.
Yeah, and at the risk of being seen as a cop-out, like part of the issue is that, and to beat a dead horse, part of the issue is that it's systemic, right? Like it's the kind of thing where even if, and there are some companies that I think have well-intentioned people at the helm that are currently concerned with some of the directions the field is going, that have questions about, for example, looking at apps, some of the data issues and concerns about how user data gets shared or stored, or sort of the potential for impropriety around that, and they're curious to know what they haven't considered. One of the problems that stands out to me in those cases, right, is that when somebody comes along and makes an offer they can't refuse, whatever the reason, right, whether there's some sort of leverage, whether it's simply so much money that they can't actually say no to it, at that point, unless you have the type of poison pill that investors generally won't accept anyway, you don't have a way of keeping somebody who is, let's say, less high-minded from doing other things with the infrastructure you've created. And so when we're talking, you know, and this comes back to one of the issues that we've talked about before, about this is less about finding sort of the right team or the right people to put on any particular pedestal, corporate or otherwise, and more about questioning why those pedestals exist and how they function in the first place. And so I don't think just because we have sort of the highest minded, most well-intentioned, most diverse group of people in any of these corporations that ultimately leads to better outcomes than the corporate outcomes we've seen to date. I know people at one point were telling me that there's this company, I think they're called Journey Collab or something like that, that has been speaking about how, I don't know, how diverse they are, how focused they are on quote unquote social justice or these concerns about, you know, equity and this, that, and the other. And I looked into the company, and it's the two investors in the company, the people behind the company. It's a guy named Sam Altman and then Apollo Project. Well, sure enough, Apollo Project is like Sam Altman's investment vehicle, right? So it's Sam Altman and Sam Altman. But then Sam Altman is somebody who has voiced support for Trump, engaged in some really, you know, almost at this point, stereotypical Silicon Valley free speech nonsense. And, you know, I just wonder, you know, you scratch the surface and you see that at first blush, it doesn't take much to reveal that this is one of the people behind that. And I'm just skeptical that we're going to see good outcomes. And yet for some reason, people are touting, oh, look, they've said these things, they've put these people on their website, so that means there will be good outcomes. You know, the history of capitalism, I think, belies that. And I would say the same thing too when people talk about like Black-owned surveillance capitalist firms. Like, I don't think just because we have a multiracial, incredibly diverse surveillance capitalism firm or surveillance capitalist firm that it's somehow going to defy the logic of surveillance capitalism and act for the public good.
Yeah, and I think that there's something that, you know, is sort of a prerequisite for any good outcomes in my sort of assessment, which would be to decriminalize substances, because what we're seeing right now, what should trouble anyone who's concerned with these issues, is that there are companies that are trying to get, you know, some sort of first mover. I mean, they're trying to get first mover advantage. They want to be the only person who is standing in front of the gate, charging tickets to something that no one else can offer. This is basic economics. And when we're dealing with mushrooms that easily grow without anyone's help, which home growers can proliferate and pass to their friends. They can grow way more. A community could grow way more than anybody in that area would ever really need. But the main issue preventing that is that those are considered criminal acts. If we see, I'm really interested in what's happening in Oregon, because we're seeing the parallel development of a decriminalized landscape and the psilocybin services. And my question is, will people find value in psilocybin services when they can curate their own psilocybin experience and at worst have to face a $100 fine, which is waivable if they simply undergo a health assessment under the successful measure 110. So basic economic principles, non-excludability is a market failure. If you can't, the example I like to invoke is Napster. So let's see. Did we get this?
I just wanted to, someone,
I see it.
Maya said in chat, New Hippie, who made the awesome TikTok. Right?
Oh yeah, check out.
We love
we were sharing that video in our Signal chat.
We were.
Yeah, it was so good.
So good.
So yeah, we saw
geeked out about it.
Someone made a video on Compass. Like what?
We were like, yeah, we got.
Well, it was funny too, because I don't know, Maya, if you scroll much psychedelic TikTok, but lately I've been doing my own little survey of the search term, and there's a lot of vapid content on there. Yeah. So to see yours was very funny.
But to Maya's point, or New Hippie's point about We Will Call It Paula, Dave, you want to tell us a little bit about We Will Call It Paula?
Sure. So you put me on the spot.
First off, we all liked it when we first saw it.
We did.
I really
I
enjoyed
cited
it.
it. I've seen The Sky with Nazis. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
To be clear, I had some issues with the ending of it.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, we all yes.
So I guess one of the things to say is that that particular comic was made in response to a video that, or rather to a talk, sorry, I'm about to drop it in the chat. It was made in response to a panel that I was on at the Social and Political Perspectives in Psychedelic Science conference that was held at CIIS.
Cultural.
And the author, I just put that in the chat. The author or the artist behind that had sort of been in the room and was listening to kind of the critiques that were coming out on that panel, some of the concerns that I had laid out around Compass and monopolies and some of the dystopian landscape that I could see emerging around some of this. Rick Doblin had actually flown in. He wasn't initially going to be on the panel, but came in, he stated, in order to rebut my points or debate me, which I thought was interesting because at the time he didn't know what points I was going to make. And I thought it was rather telling how concerned some of the folks at MAPS were about the things that I was saying regarding my initial concerns with Compass and George Goldsmith. And actually after that panel, they went and I had like a conversation with like 7 of them, and it was rather intense. But the critiques in Paula really stemmed from content that I had offered up on that panel. And one of the things I find so disturbing about it is that the number of corporate actors who have said, we've read Paula and like, we don't want to be that, right? Mm-hmm. We want to engage in the terrain in a radical way, in a new paradigm shifting, this, that, and the other. But to me, it's like, it's this tragic reality of more liberal recuperation of radical critiques, where it was like, rather than North Star. And if you look through their content, if you look through the videos they've offered, if you look through some of the sessions they've held, they say that they're not interested and not able to hold people accountable, that they're not so concerned with growing teeth, that, in one case, Liana Sananda said that the status quo is here to stay. And so I don't see how you can call yourself like put out this ethics pledge or engage with these concepts and not recognize that this is actually heralding in bad actors who want to be able to cloak themselves in this veneer of, we're doing conscious capitalism, or we're considering the impact investing approach and triple bottom line. Oh, triple bottom line isn't enough. Well, now it's quadruple bottom line. Oh, quadruple bottom line isn't enough. Like, we're just going to up this and elevate our consciousness and do all of the things that you might want to see and anything you can imagine that's good. We're going to do it. We're going to give back to the same indigenous communities that our extractive energy arm is currently decimating. And that's real, right? Like some of the investors in psychedelic space are also like heavily invested in extractive industry. And I would say if you liked Paula, check out the talk that I linked. I'd be curious, if you see the similarities. Sorry.
Yeah, because we've been seeing people cite that who don't want to engage. Like there's a lot of people who think that the critiques that Symposia, the members of our team bring up are important, but don't want to engage with us directly because they see us as being bad faith actors and radical leftists that aren't realistic. And so it's allowed,
only one of those is true.
It's allowed people though to kind of like bypass like actually engaging with the people who started these conversations in the first place. And it's allowed, as Dave was pointing out, for corporations to say that by naming that problem, they're somehow exempt from falling into that trap, which does not follow logically.
Yeah, this sort of thing actually recently played out in Scientific American, where certain conversations we started on Symposia were, not cited.
People love to not cite us. Yeah, so
if you're interested in what I'm talking about there, just look at relax, turn off your mind, relax, and float right wing, and I outline it there. I'll throw it in the chat.
I just also want to point to New Hippie added, and yes, it puzzles me because in the psychedelic stocks subreddits, like our stream stocks, they celebrate decrim news, but it seems like that actually wouldn't be in the best interest of their stocks, LOL. And Pace found specifically someone, I think it wasn't stream stocks, it was like maybe the MindMed subreddit, but it was specifically someone saying like they don't, speaking out against decrim so that they could make more money. And Pace was like, oh, they're just flat out saying it because it's like when you've kind of monopolized the market, you have more kind of access to people than you would if there were multiple avenues to access it.
And we saw that in California for years, right? Where the growers would vote against cannabis measures because that was their livelihood. That was, they could see that the prices would plummet as soon as things changed.
Yeah. And we also see this with Peter Thiel, who is one of the biggest investors in the psychedelic space, who's explicitly written on how monopolies are actually good things and that competition is for suckers. I believe that may have been the title of his talk or his article.
It's like not even an exaggeration.
And he says explicitly you shouldn't try to compete, you should have you should try to have a monopoly.
So this is the person who is aggressively investing in psychedelics.
A tie and Compass,
and Founders Fund is behind the ketamine company Mind Bloom too. I don't know what else Thiel or Founders Fund right now is behind in the space. I know those three.
Well, and we know there's connection with Demerex, but that's through a tie, and
that's all a tie.
What's his name? The Thiel Capital, right?
Cam.
Jason Cam. Is that right?
Yep.
He's involved.
That's my recollection.
So sorry to be down on that. Now that being said,
the next question is going to get everybody
to wrap that. I just want to throw something out there as far as like, as much as I don't think there are, let's say, likely to be liberatory psychedelic pharma corporations, I'd like to point out something we've talked about before, which is the notion of like what you do rather than what you say, right? So rather than getting lost in, is a company a B Corp or an LLC or this or that, particularly if we're talking about like people within the space, people who are trying to figure out ways to have local collectives, whether in the context of decrim or whatever. My question is more, how do they function and what are they doing? It may be easier to register as an LLC and actually operate in an egalitarian manner than, you know, try to jump through whatever hoops and say, well, gee, should we incorporate as a B Corp, which doesn't actually meaningfully force us to do anything, and then we signal to all these different people. And, you know, rather than playing with the sort of surface level aesthetics, really asking people to think about how they want to function and what they want to do. And while I don't think we'll see that from the pharma corporations, I do think on the smaller, more local grassroots levels, those are good conversations to have as you come up against the realities of what it takes to like start and run an organization.
Right. And I mean, it's not to say that, you know, for instance, Synthesis is a currently operating psychedelic business. And, you know, they're one of the only games in town. I'm not going to say that nobody has gone to Synthesis and you know, gotten value for it. If you can pay to go to Synthesis and, you know, perhaps you have a great time and you get exactly what you paid for. Although last time I checked, mushrooms don't cost several $1,000s, but anyhow, that's neither here nor there.
Then you have Shayla Love's article in Vice where she talked about, I think it was Synthesis that she went to, wasn't it? She described it not being the most supportive environment for her, partially because of the preconceptions of the people who were facilitating and kind of like blowing, you know, smoke in her face and stuff, you know, things that were just part of the specific set and setting of Synthesis that didn't work in her best interest. And also the toll of having to travel such a distance and go through this strange experience in a foreign country just was very difficult for her. It's a really good article. I recommend reading it.
Right. We'll check it in the chat.
So the next question is from Christopher on Patreon. He said, I'm wondering whether you guys believe it's possible to sustainably invest in the psychedelic for-profit space. If so, how? If not, why? What criteria would a psychedelic company have to meet for them to be a sustainable investment, not just economically speaking, obviously? So I'm curious, and unfortunately, there's not really a way to get a clarification on it, but I am curious, like, as far as sustainable investment, like what that means. Do we mean that like the company functions in a way that is sustainable? Do we mean that like it's sustainable as in like your money, you know, you said the question says not just economically. So I imagine we're talking about in a broader social context. To point to the point Brian Pace always makes, that like there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. The things that it takes, like when we're talking about industrial level synthesis, like we're talking about industrial processes, right? In the case of say MAPS using petrochemicals for their MDMA, even if it's a drop in the bucket comparative to what say the plastics industry uses, at the end, it means you couldn't have that MDMA without mining, refining, all of the logistics networks about that. So we're back to the realities of industrial civilization, which is a really uncomfortable talk and, you know, things that people don't like to discuss. So even if we kept that to the side, sort of like within our current economic paradigm, we don't really have, I don't know, we don't have systems that are designed to return wealth into communities that they're extracted from.
Right. And I mean, think that a classic example is Safrole. And I understand that MDMA these days is manufactured from other precursors like PMK glycodate. And I can't as easily trace back, you know, the raw materials for making PMK as I can with Safrole, but Safrole had long been steam distilled from sassafras trees, a few other species, I believe, but these were growing in Cambodian forests and in areas where landmines kept a lot of people out. So there's this legacy of war. And I can't remember exactly, was it Vice? There was somebody who did an article, a documentary showing that, you know, to harvest and steam distill a single tree to produce a single liter of Safrole, which would produce somewhere in the kilogram range of final product MDMA, that it would take about 3 days of steam distillation, and that this was done in the bush, and roughly 100 or so trees were cut down just as firewood. So in any case, supply chain analysis is something that's pretty, it's bloody. I think I saw there's some book on African colonialism, neocolonialism, that I was reading the table of contents for, and it was just supply chains for raw materials. So we're talking about sort of the subjugation of peoples and the struggles that are going on. It goes back to raw materials. Anyhow, shall we?
Yeah, and just as a real quick point, again, less about companies, more about the things that we actually have control over as non-corporate actors and what we do. Like, take a look online, there are forums like Share the Seeds. There are usually, I mean, there's a variety of Facebook groups for, say, cactus growers and others. Like, there are people that are actively sharing plants.
This speaks to Christopher's question, though.
Oh, sorry.
Christopher's question says, I'm wondering whether you guys believe it's possible to sustainably invest in psychedelic for profit space. If so, how? If not, why? What criteria would a psychedelic company have to meet for them to be sustainable investment, not just economically speaking, obviously? So what Dave's talking about is very much a grow your own approach. If you don't want to participate in the extraction or source blind supply chains where some guy on eBay is sending you some shredded root bark, consider growing it. The best time to plant a seed is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And that's true for peyote. But if you can't wait for peyote, it turns out that, San Pedro also contains mescaline and it's the fastest growing cactus in the world. So there's a lot of ways to interpret what investment means. And one way you can invest is your time and your effort.
Yeah, I'm also going to go ahead and throw out, there are people who share and sell all sorts of plants used in a variety of traditional mixtures and admixtures and brews and what have you. And if you're interested in that, I mean, it shouldn't take much searching. These people have been around for a while. There are, but again, like, I'm not going to say that, like, there are growers throughout the US who sell stuff and who have very, I guess you could say, sustainable practices, but there are also people who are frankly best served flying under the radar, right? Yes. These are the kind of things, because the way the Controlled Substance Act is written, any amount of any material that contains any amount of any scheduled substance can be treated as if it's the full weight of that scheduled substance. So we've seen people get busted for plant material. We've seen people get busted for plants. People like to argue that it's a gray area. Technically, it's not. What it is selective enforcement. So, just be aware when you're looking into that. And so the sustainable question, even around that, becomes problematized in that if any of those growers were to get big enough to, really supply large segments of the population in meaningful ways, and to do so and to be able to sort of share some of that skills to operate, let's say, a very large nursery that was paying living wage and doing all of this, they would be on the radar in such a way that it would jeopardize them and their employees. And we're kind of back to decrim questions.
Yep. I mean, for instance, with and we'll move on after this, I think, unless somebody else has something to chime in. But there have been a lot of concerns. There's been a lot of discussion of peyote conservation, particularly with regard to decriminalized nature language that specifically includes peyote. And to this, I would say that I do think that indigenous communities should have been consulted, but generally speaking, a decriminalized context would allow for, some decriminalized contexts could allow for large scale growing for conservation of these slow growing cacti. So, okay, do we want to move on to another question?
Yeah, let's do it. So Cheesy from YouTube says, what do you think about making more, I suppose, uplifting content? Your takedowns and analysis of the many shitty people and things that happen in psychedelia are great and very necessary and important, don't get me wrong. But I often find that focusing so much on exposing negatives and under-acknowledging positives can lead to activist burnout and just generally be overly taxing emotionally. a really fitting question for this week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I think everybody on this call is feeling a little bit burnt out right now, to be honest.
I don't know if it's burnt out as much for me personally. I mean, I'm all about doing this. I don't know if it's
You
so
get
much
kind of
burnout.
energized by,
I don't-
by the trench warfare, it seems like.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if it's burnout. For me, more like my head has been in a place where, like, I didn't think that I was gonna be when Pace sent the video over, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. I sat watching. I watched the whole thing, and I couldn't fucking believe what I was watching. It was really horrible, and I'm just kind of sick of being in the mindset of thinking about this predatory dude like vomiting on people and taking advantage of vulnerable people and being so fucking arrogant about it, that he's so right, his way is the only way, everybody else is assholes. I'm sick of being in that space and seeing the just sick defense that people are making for him, and thinking that this is acceptable behavior. That's more of kind of a burnout to me, I guess, than I don't know. I'm sick of thinking about it. I'm sick of thinking about this guy like vomiting.
This particular
on people,
one,
and,
yeah, sure.
you know,
But-
that's kind of what I'm sick of.
Part of like why we do that kind of I don't know what you call it, not exposing predators, but just kind of like pushing back against predator narratives and kind of pulling an emperor's new clothes, you know, of like, maybe this isn't cool. Maybe this isn't like a way to be training people to work with these substances. Part of why we do it as a group here is because we've seen individuals, including our own Lily K. Ross, trying to speak up as individuals and seeing them completely decimated, just steamrolled, blowtorch, just like everything, horrible treatment. And part of what we have done with this platform and our team has precisely been to create an organization that's capable of presenting these narratives into the space in a way that makes that people listen to and start a conversation about. And so it's sort of like, because we have this, we feel like we should use it for that purpose. And just seeing, and we'll get into this, you know, after the Q&A when we go into more about the Martin Ball story in particular, but as we've been seeing and how intense the backlash and the hatred has been against us for speaking out, it really emphasizes how difficult it is for individuals to try to do this on their own. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, Angela Ward in the comments says, you know, I think it's hard because it doesn't seem like there are many solutions, but there's a classic and age-old solution that Nishay has described that we are applying, and it is don't get mad, organize. And the reality is that, you know, collectively, we have seen some of the ugly underbelly of, you know, how the sausage of the psychedelic renaissance is being made. Okay. And we're not sure that the arithmetic adds up, that what we're going to see at the end of all whatever this is going to be worth the collateral damage. And we have articulated that we've articulated very clearly that an alternative to medicalization is decriminalization. And while medicalization is something that we're still waiting to see the fruits of, decriminalization has actually happened in multiple cities and now an entire American state. And there's absolutely no reason why it can't happen everywhere else. Okay. And a decriminalization framework is one that allows us to regroup and think about all of these other issues.
I
just go ahead.
No, I want to, because I know Pat's comment about solutions.
Before we drift too far away from the question, though, I want to give a huge shout out to Angela Ward for holding some shit down on Facebook.
Absolutely.
You know, I had some really great chats with Angela when I was up in the Pacific Northwest a couple years back, and I know she's seen the shit as well. And so it's just, you know, we've talked about before finding the others, and it's great to continue to find all y'all and then to like sort of reconnect. I'm sorry it's around the shitty stuff. Hopefully we can find some good stuff to connect around too. But on top of that, like right to this question of avoiding burnout, there's two things that I wanted to throw out there. One, and this kind of goes back to the first question, one of the things we've been meaning to do for ages that we have not done, and we will hopefully do, if not on the next live stream, perhaps on the one after that, but is to do some symposia story time and to get into some of the like, not just like why we're here at symposia, but like some of the things that we encountered as drug using, drug growing criminals who had the desire to like get involved in everything from cannabis growing to helping run underground forums to organizing psychedelic conferences and everything in between, and kind of talk about precisely how those experiences ultimately led us here, but also just like the unfolding of some of those wild and wacky and interesting encounters, having participated in some of those spaces. The other thing I'd like to throw out there as far as avoiding burnout, there's a really good piece written by Crime Think in the wake of, I think it was after the Ferguson uprisings. I may be getting my timelines off, but it's called After the Crest. And it basically talks about how sort of mobilization tends to rise and fall, right? And you have these periods of highly organized activity, and then things end up sort of falling by the wayside, either as a result of state repression or general burnout, people taking on more than they can handle. And
co-optation.
Yeah, absolutely. Counterinsurgency. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I can say around that, like having come into more public spaces of psychedelia in order to offer critiques of a lot of the bullshit I saw going on, like I've been getting pushback pretty much since day one of engaging with this stuff more publicly. And so for me, like I've always come at this from an angle of, well, like if I can find some other people who are on side, that's great. I expect that there's going to be a whole lot of people who aren't happy to hear this. And finding a group of people who are down to engage in the critiques, but also people who I can come to and say, guys, like I'm burned out, I can't deal with this pace.
Yeah, we do support each other very well on this team. So one of my advice to, graduate students, if you want to inflict that upon yourself, is don't work that hard for anyone who's not kind. But I work with a really kind group of people. Nisha will be joining us in a moment. She just had to rejoin. But I actually want to get back. I don't want to dodge or talk around the question, when will we be, or why don't we produce more like uplifting content? So I've got a couple of points that I'd like to, address directly. One is that we're a nonprofit. We have no paid staff. And most of us have, jobs that actually put food and shelter into our lives. And the things that we organize together to act in coalition, to address are the things that are really pressing. And one of the reasons why we've engaged in crowdfunding and engagement with the people who are reading our work is that we don't want ads on our site, and we don't want to be pursuing grants that allow force us to be beholden to somebody's agenda, and so that means real engagement, right? And so I would say, on the one hand, yes, we have a real issue of limited resources. What do we do with it? Okay. But I want to say that in terms of a praxis of joy, I might be something of an armchair expert on the topic. I organized with many friends.
I was going to say bike seat expert, not armchair.
Yeah. for over a decade, the World Naked Bike Ride in my city, and we had over 1,000 riders every year. And what was the broader mission for it? Well, it was supporting, it was a bit of political theater. Cyclists are naked to cars. We're vulnerable, right? To highlight the vulnerability of cyclists. But there's also a celebration of the human body and a protest against car culture and, petroleum economics. In many ways, it was an anti-war protest, right? So I've learned a lot from that kind of celebration just because, and I think it's very important. Rose, what's her name? The anarchist, Rosa Luxemburg. That's correct. She said, "If I can't dance, it's not my revolution."
Oh, Emma Goldman.
Emma Goldman, not wrong anarchist.
I got you. If I can't dance, it's not my revolution.
Yeah, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution. And we want not only bread but roses also. And I think a lot of this is baked into psychedelic culture. A lot of people are brought into psychedelic culture because of the unbridled joy, the celebration. And I get that. And I've participated that, and I've organized spaces where that can take place in a safe way. And having done a lot of that for a long time, you do start to notice that, that there are persistent issues, and that these persistent issues connect to larger systemic failures and systemic features, where this is what the system is designed to do. And so this is very much what informs our practice, is that we see the kinds of things that we're attacking, critiquing, addressing, engaging with as things that are potential threats to joy and togetherness and community and safety. So
yeah, I get a few thoughts on that. One, to Pace's point, yeah, we have to like hone our our energy into certain areas. We're a small team. Like, we have limited bandwidth on things. I will say that Russ has come out with several pieces. He did one on the VR. Everything's not negative or whatever you want to say. Russ, you're muted. I can't hear you. So we have done stuff, and like I've been here with Symposia for 7 years now, and I would say 65% of that time was focused on sort of that fun stuff to an extent, not completely, but was there more of a kind of a I don't know, a different kind of vibe? Yeah, there was. There's like a culture of abuse that exists in psychedelia, though. There's a lot of fucked up shit going on that absolutely nobody's talking about, and there are also other outlets that are more than happy to report on,
Oh, did you hear my throat clear? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you now.
Hey, cool. Yeah, that was going to be my point to the whole thing. Is I can find great news everywhere related to psychedelics, but there is a lot going on behind the scenes that I think is worth talking about. That's not that. But yeah, like you said, I enjoy writing about some happy stuff sometimes. If you want something, the Psychedelic Video Museum, I can never talk enough about. I love that. I have this projector that I set up in my backyard, and I like project that stuff onto the shed in the backyard. So that was really fun to like engage with and get to cover the opening of. I talked with this woman, Sarah, who ran a marathon on acid, which was really super interesting and just kind of funny.
Look, I've done a bunch of work with Duncan Trussell and shit on this, like we have done those things. We did an event with Duncan. We've done the thing that people probably don't realize if they've sort of followed Symposia within the last, I don't know, one to two years or something like that. Symposia has done a tremendous amount of work with maps. Like, people don't realize this. I've worked with them quite a lot. I have worked with Rick Doblin quite a lot in booking major podcast appearances from him and doing tons of events with him. Like, people don't realize that there was, when you're in a community for several years and you start learning about it, like, things change, your opinions change. Like, you learn more about the people and the groups and the ideas and the philosophy, and you learn more about that, and you change. If you don't change, you just go along with the program. And Like, I'm not really interested. I'm actually not interested in that whatsoever.
You don't want to run psychedelic corporate sponsored content?
Not forever.
No comment.
It was like a lot of the other organizations like really want to be like friends with everyone and, you know, run sponsored content to make money and to keep connections. And we are more unwilling to, what's the word, to compromise on our values, I guess you could say, and, you know, support people who are doing harmful things. Whereas other people, I'm not speaking for everyone, but other people are much more willing to be flexible on, oh, that person did this horrible thing to this other person and someone's just saying that and they're useful for me to know, so I'm going to be okay with this. And we're trying to be a little bit more supportive of the people who have been harmed and provide a space so that we don't end up with this like hemorrhaging of the community, of everyone who sees something harmful or hurtful and feels like this isn't a space for them. We want to create a safe space for people to be open, that it's not all sunshine and roses.
So I would like to move on to Jonathan's question here. I'm not sure where this was from, but Jonathan says...
That question was from an email.
Okay, thank you. Does Symposia support the idea of drug users cooperatives or user unions? The short answer to that is yes. So does Symposia believe that addiction in many ways is largely a fabrication created completely out of the construct of the war on drugs, and that hard drugs like opiates and amphetamines have only been treated with disdain over the last century, primarily here in America? While in other countries, these substances have been used rationally for eons based on the fact that they were integrated, normalized by the society who used them. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but there's actually a little bit more.
You didn't. So then hang on, it finishes. Addiction must exist for the benefit of the war on drugs economy. Addiction is a myth when you no longer are demonized or scapegoated by a corrupt puppet legal system engineered to serve the individuals who've robbed the economy and structured it into what it is today, plutocratic oligarchy. Thanks.
Yeah, so that's a whole podcast episode, first of all. But first of all, Jonathan, I absolutely encourage you to check out our conversation with Genitals Strada, who is we're proud to have on our advisory board. And the name of that podcast episode, the video is not available on YouTube yet, unless you're a Patreon subscriber, in which you can see it immediately. And Genitals outlines a number of things, including the role of, for those of you who don't know what a drug users organization is, these are DIY mutual aid, so rather anarchist kinds of modes of peer support. So people who use drugs, helping people who use drugs in a context of absolute abandonment by all institutions. So providing support for, testing substances, obtaining clean needles, learning like harm reduction practices. So that's the general gist of it. We absolutely support, people organizing to protect their communities, particularly when, it's true that one can see with the crack epidemic, one can view these as through the lens of, of the secret police, the CIA, and capitalist actors like dumping cash in vulnerable communities for other political aims of imperial expansion. So yeah, with regard to some of the questions, we are. So I think we're expanding into some of these questions too much. So maybe we should rapid fire.
Well, I just want to, there's two things I want to throw out in regard to this question.
Please, yeah.
And I would suggest, as far as podcasts, we've covered this with Ido Hardigsson as well.
Yeah, we did.
In his book, American Trip, which is outstanding, he discusses the work of Norman Zinberg and looking at American soldiers returning from Vietnam and the effects of set and setting on opiate addiction, and service members who were addicted to opiates, who had actually really easy time, or relatively easier times getting off once they got home, looking at the role of actual service in addiction, extrapolating from that to look at substance use disorders within the context of late capitalism as well, and looking through the lens of Rat Park, which again, if you're not familiar with, check out that episode. It's American Trip with Ido Hardigsson. Also really recommend the book.
Excellent, thank you.
And just as another point on that, that this was in fact by design, right? If you look at the John Ehrlichman quote, one aspect of it is he says, getting the public to associate Black people with heroin and criminalizing it, we knew we could disrupt that community. And so like it gives you insight as to the political nature of creating classed drug wars, particularly around, look at the pushback Dr. Carl Hart is currently getting right now
for admitting that he has a functional life as a heroin user. Yeah.
And compare that to the pushback, if there was any, that Pollen got talking about his trips.
Zero.
Yeah, I didn't see
not
any.
Only his trips, but in his book,
in
Pollen's entire book, How to Change Your Mind, which here we go. Here's my pre-publication copy. This guy, as a just as a brief aside, in his entire book on drugs, he says, "Oh yeah, in the '80s I blew a bunch of cocaine, but no big whoop. Nobody bats an eyelash."
Yep.
So I have a quick proposal for the group, and I wonder how we feel about it. In the interest of covering some of the ball debacle, do we want to move to that and then perhaps finish with questions afterwards, or how are people feeling?
I would keep going with questions.
Let's.
Well, some of the people who ask questions in chat might not be able to stay till the end, so maybe going through questions first and then.
Okay, so then I guess we'll move more quickly through these, if that's even possible.
This is actually a nice little break.
It is. Okay, so we have a big one from Jim. Does somebody want to read it?
Sure. In recognition that you have over 5K subscribers, and probably that many again scamming in by one means or another, and in recognition of a theory I made up long ago, to wit, that every successful movement has 3 distinct while overlapping stages, they starting with popular, such as street actions, internet traffic, academia, editorials, etc., moving to the political, where actual policy is developed, and then on to economic, where in a culture based on money, nothing really happens until the money is engaged. In large part due to your reporting, I am seeing a tragic situation develop, where there is a direct jump happening between the popular and academic stage, and the economic, in this case, far too many Wild West capitalists out for their quick buck, without any acknowledgement of the political, which makes the economic as fragile as possible and very ripe for a collapse with minimal political grounding, which could put us back decades. My question, how this all began, is, are you folks looking at using the budding political capital your 5K viewers suggest and laying the groundwork using both new and legacy media to build a viable, sustainable political entity, all safely and well removed from your new C3 cliff, to use relevant parts of the psychedelic enlightenment so many have only dreamed of to force changes so many want?
I wonder which Jim wrote this question. Hi, Jim. Thanks for the challenging question.
This comes back to partially just our limited bandwidth at the moment, which relates to something we've been talking about, trying to reach out to folks to possibly onboard new people to help us be able to do more things. So it's tricky though, because we don't have the money that we get from Patreon right now only covers overhead. We're not making any money. And so any people onboarded would also not be making money. And so that's hard to do, but this actually relates to a different question. I might jump ahead just to tie it in. It was the first question from the chat from Andrew Rose. how do I meet people like you and network? And I don't know if we want to add to more of that later, but as it relates to this, getting in touch, like if anyone is interested in these kinds of projects and feels like they have some capacity with spare time, et cetera, to help, I think reaching out, with your interest would be great. It would help us do more things like political organizing that so far is pretty tough for us as a small team. But
yeah, we want to bring on some volunteers in the short term. There's some things that we could really use some help with. I do want to say, to Jim's point, are you folks looking at using the budding political capital and laying the groundwork using both new and legacy media? Absolutely. That's
I'd say we're doing that.
We're absolutely we are absolutely doing that.
So we're across multiple platforms. We're investing in trying to reach multiple audiences using multimedia, and yeah, there are some potentials for larger projects happening.
There's active projects with both.
I would also say that some of our critiques, some of our bigger stories have already been noticed by larger players. These conversations are not just going into the ether. There are people who already have resources who are concerned and would like to see amplification of some of our critiques. So we look forward to that.
But I think just to emphasize that we are fairly limited now in terms of, like, if we were like ProPublica or something that had, an organization that was doing investigative journalism and had an actual like payroll or something, it's like the scope of what we'd be able to do along these lines would, dramatically increase from what we're capable of at the moment.
Which is amazing, because what we have been able to accomplish, I'm incredibly proud of everybody that I work with on anything that Symposia does. So, if you want to see more, please, support us on Patreon, and or even just a one-time donation. It really helps.
We got a Bitcoin donation today.
We did. We got $200 on Bitcoin.
For the moment, who knows what it'll be tomorrow.
I say we got millions, right? Or the opposite.
No, not 200 Bitcoin, $200 in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
so
just to stress, though.
I didn't say
go ahead.
Bitcoin, did I?
No.
Okay.
No.
Go ahead, Nishay.
Just to stress, like, if anyone is like, other than financial support or, attention support, if anyone does feel called to participate in the stuff we're doing, like, definitely reach out, hi@symposia.com. We, again, have limited bandwidth to do extreme oversight of people, but if you're feeling like inspired to collaborate with us, definitely let us know.
Well, and let's clarify real quick that this is a duocracy. What we do at Symposia is that it's hey, who wants to do this, and usually the person who brings up that idea is responsible for taking lead. And ultimately, if there are things that you think Symposia should be doing, send us a pitch. So and we might make you do it.
There's a lot of cases. There's a lot of cases where it's not we're like, one of us brings up something that like we don't have capacity to do.
That's
Someone else
true
will say like, oh, I'd love to do that. And so it's not really like exactly the way you described, but so it's close enough.
Surprise.
But if you've got something you want to do and you think it's the kind of thing that we can help get done, by all means, please
or like
reach out.
That our platform is a good fit for.
Or if you've got time and interest and are excited about some of the stuff you've seen coming out and don't really know what you might want to do or can do, but have some interest in doing something, again, reach out and we'll.
Yeah, because there's things we could definitely use help with that are like, we could suggest if you are enthusiastic but don't have a specific project in mind.
Idle hands are the devil's playthings, and we know how to play with the devil's hands. Wait, is that doesn't make any sense.
Go ahead, Normie.
I just want to say to Jim, I don't think any of us thought that was critical at all.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. I was going to say that didn't seem
critical. It was a good question.
And Jim, we should hop on a call in the next little bit of time too.
Yeah, Jim has been great throughout this whole. We wouldn't be a nonprofit without Jim. I mean,
I mentioned that in the chat, so thanks, Jim. Okay, so we have a quick one. What's the status of Parkinson's research and psychedelics?
As far as I know, there are a couple more like you'll find lines in a couple of literature reviews that have things like serotonergic compounds show some potential for promise along the lines of Parkinson's. I think so. At least one, actually, no, two. So two corporadelic firms have explicitly acknowledged interest in developing psychedelic treatments for Parkinson's. One of them, Silo Pharma, put out a press release. Who knows how accurate any of the claims in there are, so I'm not going to speak towards that. Something that I really appreciate a lot of Shayla Love's reporting, and I'm assuming most people in chat encountered the recent article about the Compass patents. Shayla did some great reporting on that. One of the things that wasn't covered in that article, though, is the fact that Compass has also filed a really overbroad range of patents for use patents, and one of the diseases, one of the illnesses in there is Parkinson's. But again, like as far as I know, there's not solid evidence. I think there was something about iboga microdosing at some point, and there are things that come up as anecdotal or little sort of references in a couple different papers, but on the whole, there haven't been any recent significant developments that I'm aware of.
I just threw something in the chat. It's a Guardian article, how William Burroughs drug experiments helped neurology research. And it's about Andrew Lees, who was a big fan. He never met Burroughs, but it inspired him to go into the Amazon and do work with ayahuasca, which did lead to breakthroughs in his Parkinson's research. So encourage who wrote that question?
You threw
Theo.
that into the YouTube chat?
Into the YouTube chat. I encourage Theo to read that. Did I not throw that in the? Yeah, I did. It's in the YouTube chat.
Is it way back?
No, it's just above incognito, and just below Jim.
Weird.
Not on my end.
Yeah, it's not.
Not on
I
my
don't see it.
That is.
You see it though.
So weird. I'm sure it's there. Okay, so moving on, we've got David. Hi, well, I'll take the channel or the challenge. The challenge. How do we organize a responsible countercultural movement so that is well structured, it has the potential to grow in such a way that it turns the current matrix of fear obsolete? Gonna punt on that one. I have no idea how to do that.
I feel like Dave with like the anarchist organizing like literature experience might have.
Yeah.
Not to put this on the spot, but
well, there's more. It says the structure might be the following: from the center outwards, emerging worldview. To systemic change to meeting immediate needs. Would you elaborate on that? And then, so that's one question. And then
maybe let's do that real quick.
Yeah,
and let's do that.
one.
Yeah.
So I don't know that like, so when I hear terms like the current matrix of fear and how to make that obsolete, like, fear is a human response. It's an emotion. Like I don't, I'm not a big enough Dune fan to recite the meditation.
Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that is like worse than total obliteration. I will look past my fear and beyond it and let it wash over me. And when it is gone, only I will remain. That's a slight paraphrase.
Close and much better than I could have done.
Fear.
And so I think it's less about like, how can we turn fear obsolete, whether it's the current matrix of fear or whatever matrix of fear might replace it, and more sort of like, how can we work to develop networks where we live, where we are with the people that we engage with day to day, that are resilient and capable, so that when we encounter things that lead to fear or lead to larger concerns or whatever sort of issues, we have people that we know are well resourced and capable of engaging. And I honestly think this is less about what the question is framed, and I'm not trying to pick on the question. I think it offers interesting through lines of thought. The question is framed as, how do we organize a responsible countercultural movement? And I think a way that we do that is to organize responsible countercultural movements, right? To engage with people where we live, to not be so fixated on, as Nishay has pointed out in some of her critiques of rebel wisdom thinkers, how do we create the scaled golem? How do we create the one repository that has everything in it and does it perfectly, right? I think having a little humility and saying, I may know what's best for me, but I don't know what's best for you. And if I can get into dialogue with people that I engage with more regularly about what I need, what they need, what we need collectively, and those tensions, and to then build out from there, right? So if we've got our group, that's then capable of engaging with other groups and navigating the places where our interests and desires overlap and acknowledging where they don't. And so when we talk, there's questions here about emerging worldviews, systemic change, meeting immediate needs. I think it's been huge, and it's one of the reasons why back during the West Coast fires and during the initial coronavirus outbreak, it's one of the reasons that we were trying to amplify as many mutual aid projects as we could, because I think meeting people's immediate needs, ourselves, and the people we're in community with is huge. And I think showing up and helping people realize that when the shit hits the fan, no one's going to save them, that like we can save ourselves and we can work with each other to do that. Like for me,
we keep
on
ourselves
the ground,
safe.
Yeah, exactly. On the ground projects that deal with the things we actually want to see in our lives are huge. And I think operating from there with those people to sort of ask the questions of what is our worldview? How do our individual worldviews relate? And then what sort of systemic change do we want to see? If we can't ask and start to answer those questions, we can't actually take action on them. And so I think these are questions that I'll say, unlike Daniel Schmachtenberger and again, the rebel wisdom intelligentsia, we can't speak in the abstract about that because it depends on the real material conditions and the people involved. And I think finding those people and figuring out what projects make sense in the immediate period of time, short-term future, and then perhaps a little bit longer out and starting to act on that, we may find that in taking those first steps towards actions that suddenly our midterm to long-term projects immediately change. But until we take those first steps, we don't know what changes are going to come of that. And we don't know who else we're going to encounter and what comes of that. So it's sort of like the thing to do is to start doing and then realize what shifts around that.
I think that's a great treatment of that question. I think we should move on to Guilherme via email.
Okay.
One question per person. So it says Mexico and Brazil. What countries with both countries with very long psychedelic heritage? How to integrate them into the psychedelic renaissance? I think this one might be best for Brian. I mean, Normie.
I think they should. I don't know.
Well, I think maybe the question's
out
a little
of
off. Go on.
Yeah, well, I stay out of the psychedelic renaissance. Like
I was gonna say, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that term means.
Well,
that means something different to everybody. That's just like one of these other phrases, like psychedelic community or psychedelic renaissance. I don't know what they mean.
Well, I mean, isn't it like outward facing, like public, like research and work, and I feel like that's loosely categorized together.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there has been some, research, particularly on like ayahuasca communities in Brazil, and I think the reality of decriminalization or legality, I think of ayahuasca in Brazil, that it's they exist as a model. With regard to Mexico, I lived in Mexico for a long time. Mexico is a very Christian / Catholic, probably more Catholic than Christian country. And so some of the conservatism, the cultural conservatism that, psychedelics as taboo have had to deal with, there's a real divide, like a visible divide between those who use psychedelics being, foreigners and indigenous peoples, and the people who consider themselves everyday citizens, mestizos, in Mexico. And so those are cultural questions, ultimately. So
yeah, I also just want to point out that perhaps playing off of Normie's comments about the Renaissance, we could say that, I mean, certainly if we think about Brazil, that they're actively participating. I mean, what's his name? Draulio Araujo, I think, is a researcher who's done extensive work with ayahuasca. He's been at various MAPS conferences, and it's not just him, right? There's a team of people around him. There's other folks. Brazil has also done, if memory serves, sorry, it's been a while. They've looked at providing incarcerated populations with ayahuasca in hopes of lowering recidivism rates. And so like we see there's experimentation that differs based on the cultural context, right? We also have, these realities of, let's say, the country of Brazil has a very different relationship with ayahuasca historically, has a functionally different lineage than the US does. I mean, similarly, if you look at Mexico and there are things that I think have been discussed, particularly in like underground circles around some of that. I don't know how to frame included in the psychedelic renaissance. I mean, I would say
he clarified and said,
I defer to
legalization.
Sorry, say what?
Guillermo clarified and said that I am talking about legalization.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think figuring out ways to agitate, and I want to be transparent that, like, I believe in like international movements, but I also believe that people on the ground in those countries are likely best situated to know what they need. So I don't want to like throw out ideas about what political organizing on the ground there looks like, but I think we should be pushing for decrim as a starting point, full stop, like everywhere, and decrim of all drugs, not just psychedelic ones. And along with that, like, I think we have to, so something I'll throw out there in the context of Mexico and in the context of decrim of all drugs is we need to talk about supply lines. We need to talk about growers and distributors and what this looks like given the realities of cartel control on the ground, and the question about so much of this, whether we're talking about for-profit prisons in the U.S. or incarcerated folks, for people who are incarcerated for drug crimes who are then being used as prison labor. This isn't a question of when people talk about, oh, if we end the drug war, it will save all this money. The question isn't about money in the abstract. It's a question about whose pockets that money is going into. And I think having some frank discussions about that, and I don't know, like, as far as legislative change in Mexico and Brazil, what it's going to take to affect that. But I think like figuring out what international solidarity would look like between American populations and folks south of the border would be huge.
I'm going to speak very briefly on this. I spent, almost a decade of my life working on agroecology in peasant farming communities in southern Mexico, and the rural-urban divide with regard to drug using. There are raw materials that are produced in rural communities, and they are shipped into peri-urban manufacturing centers, and then the consumption is done largely in densely populated, urban centers. So in many ways, the very structure of our global economy is one that relies on peasants. Peasants produce, a significant quantity of, I think, over 50% of our food. So this is true of our heroin. This is true of our coca. These drug producing countries are, they're raw materials manufacturers. And so that's one of the reasons why we do engage with like broader discussions of sustainability and capitalism, because they're big intractable questions. So with that, why don't we move on?
Just to say, if any of you are curious about hearing more about our Martin Ball investigation, we will be coming to that shortly because we're getting to the end of the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Quick one. How do I meet people like you and network?
Yeah, that's one I mentioned briefly, but if anyone has any more to add to networking.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot us
I
messages.
would say send us an email at hi@symposia.com.
Yeah, engage on particularly, I think, on Twitter, on some of the discourse, and like see what comes up, see what we can, generate to get. Yeah, go ahead.
But I would say, we all met at a psychedelic conference.
Multiple
psychedelic conferences.
I met you on a Skype call, Pace.
That's true. But after a lot of heavy networking at a psychedelic conference, that's true. We did meet on a Skype call. I met Nishay on Twitter, actually. And I reached out to Dave on Facebook before I met him. I said, you're going to be at this conference and I want to meet you. And I met Russell, through doing Symposia.
Symposia.
So.
I just reached out by email one time.
Yeah, Russ just reached out to us by email and he wanted to write an article.
Yeah, so seriously, just shoot us an email. And see where it goes.
And
we
also, do.
I'm a big believer, in at least the potential for the psychedelic society movement. I've started a psychedelic society. It's always good to see what resources are right around you. Who in your own community is interested in what you're interested in. Sorry, Nishay, I think I cut you off.
Oh, just we had plans before pandemic to do some like real world events as well, and so hopefully in the future that will happen. So keep an eye out when people.
We were in the process of going to the Pacific Northwest, where some of our biggest
multi-city tour
are actually located. So.
Yes, that's true. and where I grew up. So we absolutely will be going on the road at some point. But yeah. So let's move on. I think we've sort of covered that topic. Angela, this is a great question. How do we organize in a framework of decrim? How do we organize practitioners without requiring people to be lettered, schooled medical people? How do we develop a broader code of ethics? So I think that, how do we organize a framework of decrim? DPA has put forth a successful bill in Oregon, and organizing at the local city level, at the county level, at the state level, and then ultimately the federal level is how traditional organizing goes. I don't think we need to spend more time on that. There are people who are better at that than we are. How do we organize practitioners without requiring people to be lettered, schooled medical people? I think that really speaks to your third question. How do we develop a broader code of ethics? I think people are going to be a lot more comfortable with non-lettered people doing things with psychedelics in any context, decriminalized or medicalized, if the space isn't such a shit show. So if we're actually enforcing the ethics that we already have, we don't need to scratch our heads and ask ourselves, is it okay to vomit on people's faces? Is it okay to take
that hard?
Yeah, it's not hard. But I responded in the chat to this question that there's this common misconception that kindness and weakness are the same thing. It's not. That we must keep our community safe from people, even smiling, very glib and poetic people who their actions and not their words.
Yeah, I'm just so tired of hearing, oh, they're great, they're a great guy, they're a nice guy. I don't
watch what people do and consider what they say, but watch what people do.
I think there needs to be a cost for some of these actions too. I see very little costs out there. We'll probably get into this in a few minutes. I'm not going to say what I want to say yet. Probably get into this in a few minutes. But the responses, I do want to give a shout out to Mitch at Dance Safe, because he actually
yes, he did.
He actually put out a statement on his Facebook page about it, and there's a lot of people who have been silent about it. There's no costs.
I would say that is there any other psychedelic organization?
There's been some societies
Some societies, Decrim SF just tagged Maps Canada.
Well, maybe we can get into some of that when we get into ball. So there's this question of how do we organize practitioners without requiring people to be lettered, schooled medical people? And this is something that so for me, my friend Art Vandelay has chimed in on a couple different Facebook discussions around the ball stuff. He's a phenomenal artist. He also coined the phrase in order to explain how easy it is to extract DMT. Came up with the notion that if you can bake a cake, you can bake a noodle. And so he pointed out that you have people selling experiences that aren't theirs to sell. I mean, when we're talking about psychedelic practitioners, right? When we're talking about people allowing, or when we're talking about people selling these experiences, I think there's a lot of questions for what's going on. If we're talking about therapy, if we're talking about a therapeutic modality, then I think we probably should have discussions about therapeutic certifications and qualifications and what goes into that. If we're talking about people who want to do drugs and get high and I think there was that early issue with cannabis too, right? Where everybody needed a medical card in the medical states because that's how you got weed legally. And so we don't need to pretend just because you want to do psychedelics, it has to be in a medicalized framework. And hopefully Decrim removes some of that sort of posturing. There still is that question though about what sort of professionalization do we want to see about people who are engaging as practitioners? And I think the question then becomes, why are they engaging as practitioners? What are they hoping to do? And maybe that gives some clarity of what sort of categories we might look to make. But beyond that question of categorization, when we're talking about ethics and all of this, we run into the broader problems that already exist within society, right? So if we look at the way women are treated when they come forward with reports of sexual abuse, misconduct, violence, we have a problem where officials, police, and others don't take those reports seriously, right? There are reasons that people who are abused are generally reticent to report and go through the ringer of everything that comes with that. And so even if we're able to remove all of the stigma and legal repercussions to people talking about their illegal drug experiences, we then have to tackle this much broader social problem, which I think makes sense, right? If we're talking about psychedelics should reflect on and offer insight into these broader social relations. But also that's not just a psychedelic problem. So we're talking about how do we organize for more feminist approaches to our social relations, right? We're talking about how do we organize around being clear with regards to what is and is not acceptable. And as Normie was talking about a little bit ago, the costs to violating consent, right? Watching some of the things that go down. I currently live in a university town, watching some of the things that go down and the sort of behavior that is written off as acceptable because somebody happens to be intoxicated or because, oh, kids will be kids or whatever it is. We have to have those broader conversations both in drug spaces and I think more broadly around some of that. And I don't think that if we're talking about practitioners, I don't know that there's a way to break that out of some sort of professionalization. If we're talking about people wanting to be able to get high with their friends, I think we can do that in a decrim context. And I know, or I believe, Angela, that and I hope, perhaps there'll be scope down the line to have you on a podcast and get into some of that, because we hit some of these realities. And I know you've seen some of, or I suspect based on some of our conversations, that you've got a sense of some of the broader dynamics of practitioners too, that aren't related to psychedelics, right? That are related to ethics and business, and how do you have a practice that cares about people and that puts patients and clients first when you also have the realities of functioning within capitalism. So there's a ton of tensions there that I think it's easily a full episode on its own. And hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that down the line.
So is that a good place to transition?
It's a great place.
So yeah, I just want to throw out there, we've got some more questions that have come in from the chat. Feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. We're going to do our best to come back to those at the end if people aren't burned out and exhausted. We just wanted to make sure that we actually got to ball before it gets too late, both because some people may have to run, or for folks who are here, who came for that, so that we actually just address it and at least get this initial where we're at on the table. You
can say that we've been keeping our eye on the ball. Sorry, I'm here all night. I'm sorry, I'm here all night. So yeah, let's get into it. We did a.
Yeah, so I'm worried about context, because some people might have come, we didn't hear a TLDR. Should we do it shorter TLDR? I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I can do that. Let's do it. So there's a practitioner, a 5-MeO DMT practitioner named Dr. Martin Ball. His doctorate is in religious studies. He's operated mostly out of Southern Oregon, where he had a private underground practice administering 5-MeO DMT. He's written several books on his non-dual energetic therapy practice. And not recently, actually, we did put out a video on it. So that video is in the chat. It's on our channel. If you want to look into what that is. There's quite a bit of community pushback, but I would say, the majority of people who are not in the psychedelic community, who are on YouTube, looked at what we had presented and said, wow, this is in fact problematic. And what I'm talking about is what, Brian?
Just let's connect that. There's this practitioner that's in the Pacific Northwest. Everything Pace said. In October, the executive director of MAPS Canada, Mark Hayden, he came out with a book, The Manual for Psychedelic Guides. Martin Ball, he's on the cover. He edited the book. He published the book. One version of the book, he did the artwork, and he also did the foreword on the book. The book is available on the MAPS Canada website, which redirects to Amazon. There's like a quote carousel for endorsements. Rick, Paul Stamets, Dennis McKenna, Martin Ball is one of them. Wow. The book is marketed to anyone who wants to become like a psychedelic therapist, blah, blah, blah. And all proceeds of the book goes to MAPS Canada. So basically there is the executive director of one of the branches of the most respected, biggest psychedelic nonprofit, who's the executive director has a book on psychedelic guides, who the person who did all this stuff on the book is a 5-MeO practitioner who, in a speech in 2016 at LAMPS, Los Angeles Medicinal Plant Society, he did a presentation. In that presentation, he discusses how he vomits on clients, how he sticks his thumbs down their throats until they vomit, touches their genitals, touches their genitals if necessary. He also says that vomit on them, they'll appreciate it. He's one instance screaming at a Jewish man who was
sitting on his chest, and screaming.
Well, that's something that he does. It's extremely physical. Laying on them,
often on top of clients.
It's pretty much any therapist who looks at it will run away in horror. It's like that. Anyways, we have been following. We've been just looking at Mark Hayden, various things. We published an open letter on the site a few months ago on him. He was on the Netflix Goop series. There's been just, a bunch of kind of controversial, kind of hacky things. People have reached out to us privately. So yeah, we put out a video. We connected the dots there.
Well, so before we even put out the video, we were going back and forth with Mark Hayden about his involvement with Ball. Prior to his resignation, and between emails, he announced his resignation. So it was just very interesting. I'm not saying that us looking into Ball was why Mark Hayden resigned, and Rick Doblin has said that is absolutely not the reason. But it was just, it all hit all at once. We were just kind of doing this. We were looking into this manual. We were looking into why Martin Ball is on it, why, if they knew about any of these statements, and then all of a sudden Mark Hayden resigned.
Is serendipity the wrong word to be using here?
Feels like a right word to me.
Or is that synchronicity?
Maybe both.
There's been questions about, because our article that we published, or kind of statement around this stuff, focuses exclusively on Hayden and MAPS Canada in the title, and people had questions about that. Some people kind of didn't understand, well, like they didn't really work together, but part of the, like, Hayden wasn't involved in those practices, but part of what we're interested in is the way that this is actually not just about Martin Ball. Like, we knew about these types of practices before. I hadn't personally seen anyone so open and explicit and kind of shameless about what they were saying about those practices. And so we wanted to point out that this is a problem, and also point out the ways that major institutional actors and figures in the space, including psychedelic community societies, are enabling and kind of providing cover and legitimacy for people that are doing these kinds of practices. So that systemic like factor is reflected in our decision to focus on Hayden in the article.
And anybody who's wondering why, we engaged in such sort of trench warfare across multiple platforms, arguing, pitbulling the comment section, as it were, is because it is important that at this moment, when the Manual for Psychedelic Guides is being prominently displayed on the MAPS Canada website, as I threw the link to that in the chat so you can see for yourself. Martin Ball, his authority, his power level is going up in a very concrete way. He's getting the nod from some, literally, the biggest names in the field on the most sought after platform possible. And in his own statements, he is describing horrific abuses that he actively defends and supports.
This is
when asked about them, codified in his own work,
fully doubled down on it.
And to see, MAPS Canada, and Rick Doblin, executive director of MAPS, whose central mission seems to be, for psychedelics and psychedelic therapy, to put on a suit and tie, to not be the counterculture, but to be the culture. It's not just incongruous, but it's dangerous to see the legitimization of a character like Ball, whether he's actively practicing or not. He's trying to create a lineage of his own where he's advocating for these practices.
Well, and all the practices he discusses in that Lamps video, it's not just like a one-off thing. It's not just him like whipping a couple experiences out of his back pocket. It's every pretty much down to every detail he puts into that Lamps video. It's in his Entheogenic Liberation book, which acts as a guidebook for other non-dual therapists to train themselves on, like down to they will appreciate being vomited on.
And it's important to recognize this, right? Because he is on social media currently, and I'm curious to see if Adeptus Psychonautica is going to launder this tomorrow and take him at his word. But there's a
guy, the mouth at the beginning of our video.
Yes, he's another YouTuber who I don't really know what to make of Adeptus.
Real quick,
but go on. Yeah.
The point that I wanted to make is that Ball has been claiming that this was not advice for guides. This was just a few sort of more out there experiences
stories
that happened to happen. So he was just recounting these stories, except that's totally bullshit. And if you read his books, you see that he is presenting these things as practitioner approaches. And I also want to flag that, like, it's not just that, okay, maybe some of these clients would have appreciated being vomited on and we just don't understand it. Even if we ignore all of that, by his own admission, Ball had an elderly client who stopped breathing for an extended period of time. He thought that she was potentially dying. He's acknowledged that people stop breathing with regularity in some of his sessions. He's also acknowledged directly to us in email that he never got any sort of medical training or certification. CPR is not something that takes a lot of time, money, or skill to learn. So he was aware that people were having instances where they ceased breathing, and he decided that it wasn't worth it to go get basic CPR training. Now, to my mind, that is disregard for human life, or disregard for the potential that if something were to go sideways, that he was fine being ill-equipped, that he was fine with the best he could offer being lying on this woman, putting his tongue in her mouth and hoping that she came back. And I just want to point out, as Dr. Lily K. Ross has pointed out, that like if she had died, she would have died with Martin lying on her with his tongue in her mouth. That's absurd.
Horrifying.
Mm-hmm. And just like a lot of these things, like he really shows a lot of the kind of typical things you'd expect to see in like a narcissist guru type figure. Because it's like they don't need to do due diligence. They just need to go with what they want to do at the time. And they're not as concerned with the safety and well-being of their participants. So the fact that he's lying about the fact that this actually is advice that he's given out multiple times, the fact that there's a pipeline from the MAPS Canada endorsed written executive director written guide for or manual for guides to, because it's like, what happens, we've been discussing this, what happens if you're reading that and you want to specifically be a 5-MeO DMT practitioner? You go from that guide to reading Martin Ball's books, you know, it's like directly the next resource from there with his name linked and everything. So
and he's also defended abusive practitioners.
Angela, he was definitely using 5 during his sessions. He's said that multiple times.
Yeah.
Somebody
have
actually
direct confirmation. And Dave, yeah, you were about to say.
Yeah, 2 things. Before I get to Octavio, somebody chimed in on Facebook and said that there was at least one instance where Martin used more 5 than that person did in the context of a session, which to me...
And in his... Oh, sorry. But in his book, he talks about how he believes in his kind of energy transference, whatever he does, he can smoke 5 and make the patient feel it. Like that's what he talks about in his book. Because they're non-dual in that moment, he can take a hit of 5 and the patient will get higher from it in some instances, according to him. So he's taking a lot of 5 during sessions.
And just like as far as, so there was this really telling line, right, where not only does he defend Octavio, and maybe Russ, you can grab the link to the SoundCloud you put for that. But not only does he defend Octavio and his practices, and he says, "Oh, there are things we disagree on."
Brief aside for those who are unaware: Octavio Redding has been widely condemned as a malpractitioner of 5-MeO DMT, who's employed quasi waterboarding and
I don't know about
tasers.
Actual waterboarding,
and tasers, not tasers, stun guns. And all kinds of just direct like striking of people on 5-MeO DMT,
kicking them
to do this in the way that he thinks needs to be done. This person,
kicking them in the balls.
By Martin Ball.
One of the things Ball says when he's defending Octavio is that there are things in his practice, in Octavio's practice, that Martin disagrees with. There are things in Martin's practice that Octavio disagrees with. And I'm really curious what things in Martin's practice Octavio disagrees with. But it's worth noting. Yeah. So I'm about to share a link in chat, which was an open letter written.
I was just going to link it, Dave.
Okay, you link it.
No, you do.
But it's the 5-MeO DMT malpractice open letter that was written against Octavio Rettig and Jerry Sandoval, both of whom have been documented engaging in a wide variety of abusive practices.
And both who there are Martin has appeared with, I think he's like done retreats with Octavio, and he's on like a co-author on a book with Jerry.
Yeah, you beat me to it, Russ. Precisely that. So there's a link to an archived version of the 5-MeO DMT malpractice. The new one may give a certificate error. But yeah, as Angela said in chat, Octavio has had people die in his sessions. I think in one case, they held off on calling the ambulance. It's all super sketchy. And these are not, so I actually spoke. There was one of Martin's friends and acquaintances was insistent on having a call. So curious to hear what they might share with me. I took the call, and he was claiming that Ball didn't have a real sense of awareness of what was going on with Octavio. Now, I want to be clear. I met Octavio at the ayahuasca conference, the ICEERS World Ayahuasca Conference in 2014. He was running around with like an ounce of toad venom, maybe an ounce plus of toad venom, like scrapings, just waving it under people's noses, trying to get whoever he could to come with him. This was like in the lobby of a conference, just like in the afternoon. Like the fact that this person, this acquaintance of Martin's, was trying to tell me that Ball just didn't know that there were things that were off about Jerry and Octavio. And once it was brought to his attention, he realized everything that was there. Like, there's photographic evidence of the three of them, palling around. And so that just doesn't hold. But this is the other thing. We've known that the 5-MeO space is full of cowboys and just absurd practitioners, people who, like, when I was super active on the DMT Nexus, we knew that there were people doing sketchy stuff. And we had open conversations about and with and against some of these people. And it's all been swept under the rug. By and large, the more mainstream sections of these communities have said, look, if we pretend it's not there, it's not there. If we don't pay attention to it, what's the worst that'll happen? And
well, there's a lot of specifically authoritarian tendencies or culture in the 5-MeO, in the specific subset of the 5-MeO DMT community, where you get this logic that, and this is described in one of his books, Ball's books, where it's like when you get to this point where you're that kind of enlightened and that working fluidly with your own ego, and you just know intuitively at all moments what your client wants and what's best for them, which is not always what the client says they want and what they think is best for them. And so there's this sort of out where he says in the book that likely most people can't get to his level of professionalism with that. And so he can claim if someone else does something that leads to a problem, they just weren't at the level that I'm at. But that logic is really inherently dangerous, where he's describing women become sexually promiscuous and desirous in these conditions, and you can go and do anything you want, and you can say that exactly what the person wants, and it doesn't need to be what they think they want. Like, all of those things are kind of inherently dangerous.
So I want to bring it back briefly here to MAPS and MAPS Canada, and this tacit and explicit endorsement of Martin Ball. Martin Ball is the editor, publisher, and wrote the foreword for the manual for psychedelic guides. He's on the MAPS Canada website, not only as as an individual who plays this role on the book, but as an endorser of, his own work. The inside of the cover lists his name as the first in a list of a number of people who made significant contributions to the guide. So what I would say is that, questioning MAPS Canada and MAPS about this relationship is pretty crucial, because Martin Ball has, written, as Nisha was talking about a moment ago, there's a really common thing in academia. You go through the citations if you want to know more about an obscure topic. And in the most prominent place possible, you have somebody who has a body of work on 5-MeO DMT, featured on a manual for psychedelic guides, which is a general practitioner's guide. And so if somebody is interested in looking into 5-MeO DMT, they're going to start looking at Martin Ball's work, and his instructional work for guides is absolutely 100% relevant to these discussions. So we reached out to MAPS. We reached out to Betty Aldworth, who's the new communications director at MAPS, and asked some pretty specific questions.
This is breaking Symposia live.
This
is
happening. Hopped on.
Happening right now. We received an email from Betty at 6 o'clock.
I want to say a statement. This is a statement.
This is an official statement.
Should we
clarify I wanted to provide the backstory real quick.
Okay,
the backstory
cool.
is that initially we contacted Russ contacted Rick Doblin, and we included Rick Doblin's comment in our story about Mark Hayden's resignation. Russ, what was Rick Doblin's comment on Martin Ball?
It's something along the lines of, "I have absolutely nothing to say about."
I get it right here. The quote. The quote is, "I have nothing to say about Dr. Ball."
Yeah. So somebody is vomiting on clients and sticking their thumbs down their throat and touching their genitals whenever he feels they think they need it. This is the organization that is medicalizing psychedelic therapy. They're training hundreds of therapists right now. And MAPS Canada is, if anything, their sister organization. And their executive director, who is on his way out, has authored a book with Martin Ball, someone whose own instructional guides find it permissible to vomit on clients when necessary.
Well, MAPS Canada may be the sister organization of MAPS, but how does MAPS see it, Pace?
Well, actually, there was an exchange on Twitter, which was our first official reply from MAPS. Russ, who was from MAPS Canada? Russ, who exactly was MAPS Canada replying to?
So replying to a user Cunt Philosophy 7, MAPS Canada gave their official reply.
Yeah, so this was days after Symposia reached out officially to Betty Aldworth, the communications director of MAPS, with pretty straightforward, pointed, professional inquiry as to what the fuck is going on. And the thing that was replied to was on Twitter. So that's an official.
To be fair, it was from MAPS Canada, not MAPS. MAPS had maintained silence, and I think it's probably why it's worth mentioning.
And that is fair.
How MAPS views MAPS Canada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Betty Aldworth replied as such. Well, actually, I think it's worth. So first of all, let's just.
Do you want to break down their statement?
I want to break down a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that it took almost a week. We first emailed Betty on Sunday, and then on after looping in Rick Doblin, Natalie Ginsburg, policy fellow director, at MAPS, and Ismail Ali, general counsel at MAPS, asking about whether or not, if MAPS had any comment on vomiting on clients, on the association with Martin Ball, the endorsement of Rick Doblin, the endorsement of MAPS Canada of this man's practice. It took days to get a response. An official response beyond what MAPS Canada had given. So now I can read what we got, which was, hello, Brian, apologize for not responding yesterday. Most of your questions can be readily answered via publicly available documents. We got some bulleted lists with links here. MAPS protocols do not include such practices. MAPS therapist code of ethics explicitly forbid genital touching. MAPS updated statement on participant safety summarizes information provided to participants regarding their personal safety and recourse available if violated. MAPS has no relationship with Martin Ball and does not endorse the manual. I'm reasonably certain I have sent this information to Symposia editors who are at least aware that, quote, I don't know what she's quoting, MAPS and MAPS Canada are independent organizations with independent governance, strategy, and missions. MAPS does not define governance, strategy, missions, policy, or personnel for MAPS Canada. Rick Doblin sits on the board of MAPS Canada, and MAPS Canada has, at times, provided operational support and strategic advice to MAPS Canada, and we are grateful for its members and all partners advancing psychedelic research and policy reform. Thanks, Betty Aldworth, Director of Communications, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Now, this is interesting. This is interesting because in his own words on a podcast with Martin Ball, Mark Hayden states that MAPS Canada, he started MAPS Canada partly because Rick Doblin wanted to be able for folks up in Canada to support research and get tax write-offs for the donations that they made. So it seems like the level of sistership between these organizations and the degree to which they're integrated versus not,
the distinction is legal.
I just want to say this.
And in name.
MAPS just stated in print that they do not endorse the manual. MAPS does not endorse the manual for psychedelic guides. This is
written by the MAPS Canada executive director. Fucking wild.
It's that's pretty incredible. And I mean, honestly, I would say that that's possibly the only, positive thing that came out of this entire email exchange is that, MAPS has distanced itself from the work of Martin Ball. So
this is also Mark Hayden.
Mark Hayden.
Just for the record, this is also the first interaction we've had with Betty Aldworth as MAPS Director of Communication.
Yes, so that's true.
It was quite strange to us to be told that, she said anything to us before in her capacity as MAPS Director of Comms. And for me, like, there's a thing around this where with the interactions we've been having over the last week, it feels like there's been a lot of gaslighting and misdirection. And the fact that it took so many days to even get a response around this, and then to get a response that has, like, again, legal distinctions and yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, there are the two lines that stood out to me as being very, like, unkind. Like, there was the line about, as you could have found out, I'm paraphrasing, from publicly available documents.
Right.
And then the line about, as I've already shared with Symposia. Like, though that rhetorically, like, those lines are only kind of like creating a distance and kind of like a sense of shame, towards us. Like, we should feel bad about asking, which,
like, we're bothering busy people.
Right.
Well, and the other thing is, if we're going just from the public documents, I mean, one, if we look at the way MAPS and MAPS Canada like to sort of co-promote things or present themselves, if you look at the branding, if you look at the name, right, they don't strike you as necessarily distinct entities. But on top of that, right, if we're just going by the publicly documented statements, right, MAPS Canada is prominently recommending the guide as a foundational resource for psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, and shamans. So if she wants us to go off what's publicly out there, there's clearly conflicting messages.
Well, and so I looked at MAPS Canada's mission. They exist to support MAPS. That's what they exist to do. And so I guess we can definitively state that in one crucial way they have failed in that mission, and that they have produced a manual that MAPS won't touch with a 10-foot pole.
How does a group that's major focus is developing psychedelic therapy with MDMA, how does that group let their executive director publish a book that they then don't endorse, that is about guides and that is for therapists?
That their executive director does endorse. So Rick Doblin does endorse the guide.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I meant how the organization.
The organization does not endorse the guide.
Yeah.
Rick Doblin, who sits on the board of directors of MAPS Canada, does endorse the guide.
I won't get into some follow-up questions.
I will not get into what other MAPS employees have said privately about this.
Yeah, we're going to need to follow up with Miss Aldworth and sort
also,
some of these questions out.
Can I just point out how crazy it is to think that, like, well, at least from my perspective, that anyone, I mean, we're like invested in this, so we kind of already have an idea that Maps and Maps Canada were two separate entities. But for anyone, like any layperson, Maps and Maps Canada are like the same. They share the exact same branding. They have the same logos. They have like people on teams that are the same. I don't know. That bothered me to get such a snarky comment.
It's a corporate response that is to be expected.
But it really shouldn't be hard to condemn these kinds of like practices and to.
I think that's actually. Go ahead.
What were you gonna say?
No, I was gonna say something else.
Well, it's just we've seen stuff like this before, like with the situation around Neil Goldsmith leaving the Horizons like conference, where it's sort of like a boilerplate, cover letter addressing, oh, he's not going to be here anymore, and then just like kind of brushing it under the rug, which I feel like we keep losing opportunities to actually deal with these problems and acknowledge them. And some people are saying, because we've gotten a lot of hate this past week.
We've gotten a lot of love though too. I would say that the support that we've received has been, I think it's probably around an 80-20, 90-10 support, and comments and everything.
And yet,
that doesn't change like what I said. Like we've gotten so much hate.
Yeah.
Like
I just want to say
that Thomas Hatzis, psychedelic historian and witch, has called at least two of us pieces of shit repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Wait, you mean shitposia?
No, well, in addition to the entire team being it's a galaxy brain take, to be sure, but the level of ad hominems and just straight vitriol from people who, I mean, a number of whom, and I think alarmingly so, are practitioners.
Yes.
Hello, red flags. But also, like, if we're talking about, I think Nishé's point about this shit shouldn't be hard to disavow, and yet Maps Canada, in that official response, says Martin Ball, and this was on Twitter, right? So the first response we got from Maps Canada on Twitter was Martin Ball helped in some editing and the publishing the manual for psychedelic guides, but that was the extent of his assistance. Now, brief pause. Martin Ball's Facebook post about what he did reveals that assertion is just wrong.
He called himself a book Sherpa.
It says with contributions by Martin Ball.
Right. Well, and he did. He wrote the
significant contributions. Yeah.
He says that Hayden invited him to add things
to fill stuff in.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Maps Canada goes on to state, we were not previously aware of his video about his psychedelic practices, and we have no involvement with or comment on his therapeutic practices. So here's Maps Canada explicitly calling what Ball does therapeutic practice, and saying they've got no comment on vomiting on people, touching their genitals, not engaging in proper safety training. The fact that this is even a discussion is mind-blowing.
And part of the thing I wanted to say before in terms of the hate that we've been receiving is like a lot of people have been projecting really weird assumptions about our motivations for doing this work, including my favorite is by Ball himself. He
thank
said
you.
That,
I was hoping you'd bring this up.
that he said that some of Dave used to work as a moderator for the DMT Nexus for a long time, and he said someone on the staff is affiliated with the DMT Nexus. They're probably just like upset about his characterization of Terrence McKenna in a reality sandwich article.
Dave's response to that was
Dave called it a critique. He didn't critique McKenna. He just complained that McKenna had a nasally voice.
Which is also a weird, like, authoritarian thing. Like, just like it's a like phrenology, like the way that you can like assume that you can judge a person's character by how they look. Like he's assuming about McKenna that he's not intelligent about the things he speaks because his voice is too nasally. He's not speaking from his deep core and showing that he knows.
Look, I'm throwing this. Look, I couldn't get entirely through this many years old reality sandwich article that I've just thrown into the chat because it's so prosaic and weird. But like, if you were brave enough,
it's a bad take. But it's definitely not the motivation. We didn't have some chip on our shoulder.
The motivation is a very basic human horror at the idea that someone is standing in a room full of people who are applauding and laughing
while
he describes grisly, vomitous practices.
And normalizing that as a way of doing this kind of work. And so one of the things I wanted to say, sorry, I keep getting distracted from it, is just the idea that we're not like, people are like, oh, they're just these like malcontents that want to burn things down and don't want anyone to have nice things, and they're just destroying the Renaissance. And no, like, we feel like we should be doing things the right way. We view psychedelics as having extraordinary potential. None of us would be here if that weren't the case, but we're not willing to have collateral damage along the way and just be okay with narcissistic gurus constantly centering their toxic ideologies.
I think
100%.
Dave's response to, it was like a week ago or something, and Dave, I think you texted me and you said like, oh, I forgot about Ball's awful take on McKenna. Like, it wasn't the motivation of like of anything.
I forgot. I mean, look, back then,
didn't even know it existed.
Ball sent a proxy to the Nexus to like argue on his, or it was Ball under like an alt account or something. Like, yeah, okay, fine. Like, I've flagged Ball as like a potentially abusive, likely narcissistic practitioner since like I first caught a whiff of him. Sorry. Yeah. Like, I mean, none of that personal concern factors in like those personal like senses of him factored in to literally seeing him in his own words discuss absolutely horrific practices. Like,
I want to address something in the comments. H13 says, any inclination if MAPS is going to make a public statement specifically denouncing Ball and distancing themselves from the manual. I think we have every indication, first of all, that they have explicitly distanced themselves from the manual, which is wild, and MAPS Canada.
That wasn't an email to us. That wasn't like a public statement.
Not a public statement. That's it. But I do not believe that they will be making a public statement on this issue unless there is some kind of groundswell. And honestly, I want to say very clearly that one of the reasons why I got involved with the Psychedelic Society movement is that I saw the psychedelic renaissance as something where a lot of money and capital and government regulation was going to do this top-down thing on something that I cared deeply about. And I looked at the landscape and I saw no democratic input in the discourse whatsoever. And I put real time into organizing my own community and to trying to engage more broadly with other trying to find out what was going on with other psychedelic societies around the world. If you're an organizer of a psychedelic society and you're watching this and you find the practices of Dr. Martin Ball and the abdication of institutional responsibility by MAPS and or MAPS Canada for denouncing very basic things like vomiting on psychedelized clients, helpless people. If you can't distance yourself from these specific instances when there's a disconnect from including these people in projects that prominent people, leaders have endorsed, well, what are you doing? What are you organizing for? Why did you organize your community in the first place?
And New Hippie also had a question about like motivations for not disavowing, and is it just to not create discord? I think some of it is just a desire to not be involved in controversy. And
effect.
I don't know. Yeah. Not to get bad attention around it. But and I don't know if any of it for any of these actors, like this is not likely related, but just I was thinking about the scope and scale of Ball's supporters that have come out against us like in force this past week.
It's been surprising.
And it just kind of reminds me of like the way people don't want to like kick a hornet's nest around Donald Trump, and like they might not agree, but like also don't want to face the wrath of like his followers. Like I feel like there could be an aspect of that of like not wanting to have this.
There's
huge,
an actual
like,
wrath of his followers.
And yet what Nishay said earlier is worth repeating. We keep missing these opportunities to have difficult and important conversations about power and abuse in psychedelic community.
I've been thinking about it, like, the response that surrounded Neil, like the initial response there was swift. It was like, it was real swift. It was gone, and he was gone quick.
Wait, what are you talking about?
Neil
About
Goldsmith.
Neil Goldsmith being
Oh,
removed
right.
from
Just
Horizon.
for clarification, Neil Goldsmith was the former MC of Horizon's
board member.
Perspectives in
organizer.
Psychedelics and board member
I
of a annual
mean-
conference in New York City.
Sorry, Nisha.
I spent a year before that happened going to conferences in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, in all over. And everywhere I went, I said there are these problematic people, and I would allude to him being there, and I would talk to people off stage and say, this is a problem, something needs to be done here. And I was talking to people, powerful people in the field, and it took I was after I did that for a year before things actually kicked off. And that's just my little contribution. Like, other people were doing stuff at the same time. So this was not, I think it's a mischaracterization to call that swift. Like, I don't think that was fair to the situation. It was very long drawn out.
It was, look, when after the official complaint was submitted, it was dealt with quick. I know that there was other people involved around, and that took a long time to build up to that point.
Well,
there was a critical mass, though. There's a critical mass.
And there was also resistance, right? There were attempts at damage control. There were attempts to put the lid back on it. Like, Nisha and I were in Australia together, and the shit that went down was not appropriate and showed a clear prioritizing of the field of the Renaissance, right, at the expense of real people. And this actually brings something up, like when we're talking about the timelines and is MAPS invested? The audience will notice, or maybe hasn't noticed, that Brad Burge is gone from MAPS. If you look at this article that Olivia Goldhill published in Quartz with input from various sections of the community, there's a line in there that said, Buisson said she first reported the sexual allegations in January 2018 to MAPS Director of Strategic Communications, Brad Burge. In an email to Quartz, Burge denied that Buisson reported any sexual experiences with her therapist to me or MAPS at the time. Now, looking at how things played out, I mean, this goes on to say that eventually, 9 months later, Buisson informed Michael Mithofer, a clinical investigator, in October of 2018. But looking at some of the timeline that went down, and looking at how long it took MAPS to put anything out, looking at the internal emails that MAPS was sending out to their own staff, looking at the changed informed consent document that MAPS tried to do on the sly, in my opinion, looking at the change in some of the various documentations, or the sudden appearance of discussions around, issues of ethics or this, that, and the other. It seems to me that MAPS has presented time and time again that they are willing to sort of do whatever they can to try to avoid wading into some of these conversations, particularly when they know that there's not a whole lot that will make them look good. And instead, it seems like they try to construct, in some cases, seemingly retroactively, evidence or documentation to say, oh no, look, see, we've been doing the right thing all along. It just, we hadn't quite gotten there yet, or, oh, this slipped through the cracks, or, oh, we just hadn't figured out this one thing was going on. And I think if we look at the history of sexual abuse within psychedelic therapy, it's much deeper than that. And the fact that here we can't even get a straight answer about vomiting on people and touching their genitals and the rest of it, that's telling enough.
In Olivia's piece, the Quartz article, she even mentions how Rick Doblin's dissertation acknowledges how pervasive the problem of sexual abuse in therapeutic contexts it has been historically, and yet there were none of the people participating in these new trials were informed of that, or there was no kind of protections put in place to address that. So we're seeing again what happens when there's this kind of failure to grapple with history.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of moving forward, I will say that we're not done unpacking this. The reality is that there's a lot of there were a lot of teachable moments that we would like to share with the broader community in the interest of harm reduction. So you can see we will be producing more material for this channel, for broader sharing, consumption, what have you, educational material about the things that we have learned from this particular interaction, because the reality is that this is serious. It is serious that that something like that is a pretty cut and dry, clear case where somebody is admitting to, we're not just talking about anti-social stuff. It's gross, people. Don't vomit on people. Don't shove your fingers down people's throats while they're on drugs. Like, how is this basic kind of human, normal, morally functioning compass, like, being bypassed for larger institutional goals? Well, we will break down some of this because maybe we're tired right now, but we are committed to, broader narratives of raising the sort of consciousness and criticality of the psychedelic community and presenting these counter narratives so that we can.
I mean, these are common sense points that anyone outside the psychedelic community would say, "What the fuck?"
Yep.
It's like pretty.
There's
simple.
also a huge number of contradictions to talk about, both in Ball's own words, in Ball's own documents, in Ball's books. Yeah. Right.
But it's not just a Ball. It's not just the Ball show. We will be connecting these issues to broader systemic issues.
He has made clear that he's going to push back, and there's been like a concerted effort to paint us as the problem.
Yeah, and that concerted effort it's been concerted effort by a certain number of Ball supporters who, just they are organized, and they have a lot of support for this Dr. Ball, and they make sure that he has the support from his community, and I understand that, but we need to be educating that community, because if you're going to be supporting Ball in this way, I don't know, Nishay, I feel like I cut you off, but like I needed to address directly the Ball supporting community. So
yeah, no, I mean, I just want to say that, like, it is hard for me. I mean, again, Normie has like, he gets a certain thrill, I think, from just the battle.
It's certainly not a thrill, but like, I don't know why people fucking put up with it, really.
I mean, it reminds me, I was saying to these guys, like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with like the Gamergate situation, but the ways that people organized hate, like around folks like Anita Sarkeesian, who was just saying like, hey, there's some really kind of sketchy dynamics in video games, like, maybe we should kind of ask why these choices are being made. There was so much hate organized, and like death threats and all this stuff for raising the conversation. And I've been a little shocked at just the scale. Like, I knew that some people wouldn't be happy with what we were doing. I mean, we have a video on our landing page that's like, we're controversial. So that's not new, but just the scope of it, and the like slander and ad hominems, and like talking about how evil we are. Just, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely not fun. And I guess that's their goal, is to make this like unpleasant for us. But it just, and leave it to say, like, we really appreciate all the support and kind words that we have received, because it is kind of taxing, like, over time.
I mean, we're used to this. Like, it was funny. We had a call the other yesterday with a writer who's in the New York Times, and we were talking about some stuff. And I said, one of the first things for me a few years ago was just seeing Peter Thiel enter the space, and he's like, oh man, like, it was just so apparent. But you tell that to anyone in this space, it's like, fuck yeah, we're winning. Like, we're getting the capital in here. We're controversial for pointing that out. We're controversial for pointing out that Christian Angermeyer, the founder of Atai, is also on the advisory board to Paul Kagame, like murderous dictator. Like it's us though. It's our problem.
Yo.
You know, it's easy. It's easy. They can punch at us and, you know, make it look like we're just a bunch of idiots, you know.
There's also a lot of people who have been
Standard.
like, a lot of people this makes uncomfortable, like, and they'd rather not have to deal with it. And so, you know, they see something and they don't know us, they don't know where we're coming from. And then someone will say, oh, this is Symposia. They're just some, you know, people who are upset and trying to burn things down. Don't pay attention to them. And then the unsure people are like, it allows them to not take the situation seriously because they're like, oh, thanks for sharing that. Good to know that I don't have to look more closely. And so that, you know, that's kind of frustrating, but you know, it is what it is.
And so I want to call out in the comments that Tara Rodriguez has commented and said that several factors of people who don't want to disavow Martin Ball. Number one, MAPS type entities that don't want to shake anything up and get it on themselves. Yeah, I think we've outlined that. Two, people who know Ball personally and don't want to hurt his fifis. First of all, hilarious. And second of all, yeah, true. Totally human, very real. Three, people who fear losing access to their source of the medicine. So 5-MeO DMT seem kind of clicky sometimes. Yeah, we are talking about one of the most sought after substances. They call it the God molecule. Do you think people might be willing to supplicate themselves before the gatekeepers of the God molecule? Yeah, I do believe that. Four, there's 5 points. Four, old heads who
6 now,
barely...
yeah.
Oh, 6 now. Man, we're on a roll here. Old heads who barely find anything problematic and think everyone who finds anything too weird are overreacting. Have we ever encountered anybody like that?
That one makes me laugh for some reason. Yes.
And then 5, people who drank his Kool-Aid. So they've already had the 5-MeO medicine, and in one way or another, they did get value from it. We have interacted with people like that. Yes, this is true. How the power of 5-MeO DMT is such that sometimes somebody can be doing pretty weird things while you're doing it. You still get benefit from that medicine. And then number 6, it says kind of hard to define a group of other underground practitioners who don't want their own practices as unlicensed therapists to be looked at too closely.
They don't want to blow up their spot. Yeah.
These are pretty fair
and
points.
They're all telling
Thank
on
you for
themselves.
offering them.
I just want to point out for number 6, they're all on Facebook. Well, not all. A large number of them are on Facebook telling on themselves right now. And I think it's just jaw-dropping to see, some of those folks, especially knowing, as I do, a number of stories about some of them from behind the scenes from people who they have harmed, or people who are associated with people who have been harmed by them. And to that third point, and the power differential, right? Like the fact, and this is one of the things that we're going to get to in one of the future, we're going to do a video unpacking some of the dynamics around consent and the authoritarianism here. But like when we're talking about people who may not have access to this compound, who recognize a practitioner like Ball or Octavio or Jerry or any of these other people as their way to get access to this, the things that they're willing to do, right? It's like when you go and you do extreme adventure sports, and you sign away all of your rights. When you sign those contracts where you sign away all of your rights, you're not actually able to sign away all of your rights. Like they do that in part to like make you think that you've signed away all of your rights, so that if you want to then sue at a later date, rather than consulting a lawyer, you say, oh, well, I signed all of my rights away, so I shouldn't consult with a lawyer. When we look at some of the power dynamics around Ball and co, like we not only have this thing where they are the gatekeeper to these compounds and to the experiences they facilitate, we're then talking like the people who are seeking this out in many cases are generally on the more naive end of the spectrum as far as drug experiences. We're generally not talking hardened psychonauts going to these people paying out for these kinds of sessions. Now, when we look at that, there becomes this additional layer of power relations where people don't really know what they're in for. People recognize like, this is the cost, this is what the ticket costs, this is how you get on. You sort of have to agree to whatever in order to take the ride. But then on top of that, like to anyone who's done fast acting, vaporized or smoked tryptamines, like what you want 10 seconds before you take your first hit versus when you take that hit versus 10 seconds, never mind a minute or two after, like those things are all fundamentally different. So the notion of saying, well, you consented to this and I'll just figure out what you need. And, you know, sorry, if you can't tell me that that's no longer what you want, that's just on you. That just doesn't work. Like it doesn't acknowledge any of the realities about the nature of those experiences. And so the sort of logic that we've been encountering throughout, I think, falls apart once you start unpacking it and asking questions. And I think it's part of the reason why the practitioners and other folks who've so vehemently opposed the comments we've been making online in the wake of putting this stuff out there, it's why they keep resorting to the way that we've framed the video, or the notion that,
oh my God,
bad faith arguments.
You didn't come correct when you started talking about that guy puking on people's heads. You should have got your house in order.
I have addressed that twice. I have brought up, like, you know, the puking, but yada yada, twice on Martin's Facebook wall, and he has not engaged with it at all. Yeah. He just like, you know, tries to misdirect.
Well, he's also pretended like we hadn't. He kept saying at one point to Russ, saying, "Hey, I offered that you could come on my podcast. Hey, I offered." He knew, and he made comments after that claiming that we hadn't acknowledged any of the offers to talk with him, when he knew that we'd already accepted to be on a third party panel involving him, because we were not interested. And
explain that to him.
Right.
Yeah.
And we had explained that we weren't interested on having him on our platform and giving him our access to our platform, and that we certainly weren't going to direct more eyeballs towards his platform, given the abhorrent things that he acknowledges doing. So,
and so, yeah, so I mean, that what's that line about when you don't accept, like,
persistence?
Yeah,
persistence is a red flag.
Is a red, yeah. So it's like the fact that he knows that certain ways that he's framing things and certain aspects of like our engagement are false, like the way he's.
Let's back it up, and just in persistence is a red flag for what? Like, let's get like that's a point worth highlighting a little.
Well,
bit
someone who's willing to not accept no for an answer, to transgress against boundaries in one arena, tends to be willing to do that in other arenas. So it's like you're showing that that's the sort of thing that you feel comfortable doing, just pushing and pushing until you get your way. We see this with Trump as well, in terms of, like, you know, the grab him by the pussy rhetoric, and then the whole not accepting the election results and just going. It's a similar kind of ethos that tends to go with predators. So he's kind of, again, telling on himself in that manipulative way. And this just relates to something I was trying to say before. So just real quick, in terms of the people who have drunk the Kool-Aid, there's an aspect of like actually drunk it in the ideology, and they're like, yeah, non-dual, everything's, you know, great. But there's the other people who have only seen his mask, and he's actually very good at coming across in an affable, friendly way, to the point that Russ
comes off like a nice guy.
In questions, like even before he released the video, when Russ was journalistically kind of asking for information, he came across as like very friendly and like, call me Martin and all of the rest. And even Russ, who knew the extent of the kind of transgressions, was like, part of him was saying was kind of like wanting to think, oh, he seems really nice. And then people are able to use that way of interacting with people to get their guard down, make them trust you, and then they think you're a really good person. And when you have in your head an idea of someone as being really friendly and nice to you, it can be really hard to square that with the fact that they do really harmful things. But his mask slipped publicly at the Exploring Psychedelics conference when was it Octavio that was being questioned? Yep. When he, in a room full of 100 people, and the people on our comments to the video have said that they were there and they were really disturbed by it. He got up and shouted profanities to a room with children, young children.
Yeah, you can hear children crying in the background.
Yeah, they start crying as he's screaming at them at the room. And that's the kind of situation where it's like his mask slipped there. Like if you have any familiarity with narcissists and they have this like nice person mask, but then sometimes you'll see there's this other side to them that they usually are successful at hiding, this sort of contempt and this view that their way of wanting things to be a certain way, that you have no place to question that and question what they do. And then they often will stand up for other narcissists because they want...
Because game recognizes game.
Exactly.
Check out Alicia Danforth's talk coming down from the psychedelic power trip, where she talks about some of this, and she talks about the fact that these people flock to each other because you can get high on each other's narcissistic supply. Like it's wild.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll throw out there, like, I think we've got more questions coming in. I'm just adding them to the document for the end. I know we're going to get into more of this. If there are things for sort of where we're at the moment, I want to take a moment and thank Heichen, which sorry if I'm
yes,
pronouncing
as
your
do
last
I.
name. Wrong, but it's
after receiving quite a lot of backlash about the video. It's nice to hear something that someone appreciated.
Read the comment. Read it. What is it?
Russ, your edits were appreciated and well done. Fuck the critics.
Yeah.
I also want to point out,
just so we're clear, those edits were in the style of Victor Berger, and Victor Berger's work because of its sensationalism. It's Vic Berger pointing to some of the sort of in between spaces that become tells for people's personalities, like. They have been really helpful in pointing to chinks in the armor of such powerful characters like, say, Joe Rogan and his support for Gavin McInnes, the founder of the Proud Boys, who were instrumental in the insurrection in Washington, D.C., the takeover of the Capitol building. Joe Rogan is a towering figure in media, and anyone who can point to the real dirty deeds that this man has done and get traction, has my respect, because the fact is that, and I don't want to derail with Joe Rogan, but the point is that Victor Berger pointed to real issues and got real eyeballs, and started a conversation, and that Russ, your original edit was amazing. And we all loved it, and that's why we all were behind it and are still behind it 100%. The only reason why we did a recut was to facilitate conversation that had already been started by your amazing video.
Just bullshitting. Right? Because like some of the people who said it was just like the way that things were edited or this, that, or the other, like when we presented them with the edits, they still had problems.
That's what I thought was so fun, to be able to release the like literally all I did was went and I took out the slow-mo and the zooms from the same exact footage. It just wasn't as fun to watch.
I was joking to these guys, like, we should have a competition for the ball supporters to take the original footage and cut it in a way that makes it look good. Like, see if you can do that, because it's actually not possible. And the thing about Vic Berger, because there's the whole narrative that the supporters are running with, that this is just like a TMZ sensationalist, like bad faith, whatever, like tabloid mashup that was taking things out of context. Like the Vic Berger analogy is actually much stronger than, and there's kind of analysis written online about his editing style. I really recommend, he did with Vice, a portrait of Donald Trump, which is just, it's like an hour long, but it's like an acid trip just watching it. It's surreal. But one of the things that is spoken about again and again in regards to his style is that it's this way of poetically revealing the truth behind people's carefully curated personas by kind of like focusing on little details, and also just like making it like, some people have expressed that it's actually harder to watch for some people, the unedited straight talk of it, because it's so just disturbing, and just being able to have some kind of like dark humor around it and seeing is actually easier to tolerate, because it's so upsetting. But yeah, it's definitely was not done in any kind of like, the raw material is really bad. Like there's just no way around that.
Yeah, like we said, the footage came to us unedited, and we watched the whole thing and thought it was fucked up. Like I hear some people's issues with maybe feeling like it was sensationalized, but also there are long stretches of clips in there that are completely unedited audio of him saying exactly what he's saying. It doesn't change anything, in my opinion.
Yes.
The gravity of what he's saying.
Well, I want to point to one thing that Ball, I don't think we've talked about, and this points to certain narcissistic and cult and grooming techniques, and that is that very early in the video, and actually now that I remember, I'm not sure where the timestamp is, but Martin Ball says, I tone, I growl, I click, I purr, I do this weird, I can't do the thing that he does, but he
do the devil noise.
The devil noise or whatever it is. And he does it like, let's get this thing out of the way that you might have an issue with. So he, at the outset, gets you to accept like a real, like outside of the norm behavior without question or comment. Okay. So we start from a place of like, we are already outside of you being able to critique me. And then we get into progressively weird territory, to which reminds me of the classic Voltaire quote, you know, those who can convince you to believe absurdities can convince you to commit atrocities. So, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, just the response. I mean, and this is something, so Lily and I were talking about this during another symposium meeting where, you know, some people in the course of fielding disclosures or dealing with some of this kind of work will comment about how draining it must be, you know, when you're dealing with people relaying some of their traumas and this, that, and the other. And the response is like, that's actually not the most draining part. Like, one of the most draining things about this is the normalization of like antisocial and really disturbing behavior, and like having a room full of people laughing at what Ball was describing. I mean, and look, it's the same way, like there's footage from psychedelic conferences where I can pull speaker quotes where they're talking about seemingly like non-consensual dosing, where like there's one guy reporting an experience and he's like, oh, and you know, there was sleep deprivation and there was this, and they woke me up at 2 a.m. and said, did I want ketamine? And like, I didn't know there was going to be ketamine, but like, what do you say when somebody wakes you up at 2 a.m. and tries to give you ketamine? And the audience starts laughing, right? And it's like, because of the way in which drug use is taboo, and because of the manner in which, like, if you go to a psychedelic conference, like everybody's sort of like electric with, ooh, we can talk about our criminal experiences and we're with the other drug nerds and we can share. And so you get this weird normalization where some of this behavior that's actually really abhorrent, it's like, oh, like this is funny. We can talk about drugs. We can talk about weird shit and drugs, and it can all come out and it's all just fun and games and this, that, and the other. And there's a lot of darkness in these spaces. There's a lot of, there are legacies and ongoing realities of practitioner abuse. And I think it's important to recognize not only like what strikes us as odd, but the way that then some of the currents around us try to push against that or pull us in whatever directions, because I found myself dealing with some of that where it's like, it takes multiple self-checks to be like, actually, no, that doesn't sound okay. Like there's something else going on here, and trying to dig into that.
Yeah. So
there's plenty of more Ball content. We're going to tie it into larger systemic things. We've been on for a while. We've got a bunch of other questions. So I think we'll probably try to wrap by getting through some of the remaining questions.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, like, thank you to everybody who engaged with us. You know, in the chat's been fire. It's been really great. We are committed to doing these live streams on a regular basis, and you know, the ones that we've done in the past have been wonderful. And we do use these to cut from and create other videos, because there's a lot of topics that we cover, so that, you know, we can provide perspectives that, you know, we think are important, you know, for wider consumption, for people who aren't going to sit through, you know, a 2.5 hour talk. And actually, on that point, the original Lamb's video was a 2.5 hour talk, and it sat as the first and or second most popular video that was on the Lamb's page, and there was very little engagement or in the community. We condensed some extracts from that, and psychedelic communities across the country and elsewhere had a seizure. So it's important to condense, to extract, to purify. And so some of these live streams are the substrate for that. So, we like to give away merch when we do this. Do we have some merch to give away?
Yeah, Nishay, you had a suggestion.
Oh, Nishay, you're muted.
Good. I don't know if it's Tara or Tara, but Rodriguez, who provided the 6 types, because I feel like we riffed on that for a while. So that seems like if you're interested, you can email hi@symposia.com, and we can send you some merch.
We forgot to announce it at the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, so it's a guerrilla giveaway.
Yeah.
We do value the engagement. We do. I think anybody who's been in the comments throughout this has seen that we do dip into it. We pay attention to it during these live streams. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate your support. We appreciate y'all's Patreon contributions. It literally sustains the work that we can do. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can I throw out a little little PSA if people don't know yet?
Yeah, do it.
Symposia.org was bought by someone and now redirects to martinball.com. So
by a ball supporter specifically
accidentally comes upon that.
Yeah. Trace Richardson.
It's the one.
Ball
He's
supporter.
also
Okay, so actually Tara in the comments has said she's good. So I have a nomination for another individual. I would say let's do New Hippie. New Hippie, if you want some Symposia merch, send us an email. So
hi@symposia.com. And on that note, maybe we can jump into
did you want to plug the Kat Harrison?
Yes, absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, so we also just got a heads up that Kat Harrison, who is a phenomenal ethnobotanical researcher who runs the Botanical Dimensions Library out in Occidental California, back in January, she was there was somebody broke into her home and assaulted her. There is a GoFundMe up that I will link now. It initially had a goal to raise about 20 grand. I think it's hit that goal, and they've put a stretch goal. Kat is somebody who's made like a bunch of contributions, including to the old Os and Auric mushroom grow guide. She did the illustrations for that. She's made a lot of phenomenal contributions to the field.
If anybody's seen the classic Algerian mushroom head shaman, she did that illustration.
Yeah, there's a ton of work that she's done that hasn't gone recognized, and I've seen her at events with amazing poise and grace and aplomb engage with people who come up to her and just start gushing about Terrence nonstop, don't recognize sort of who she is, what she's done, the amazing work and everything around that. And I just, yeah, it's a really, it's upsetting. She's also had setbacks on a Mazatec documentary that she was working on prior. The Botanical Dimensions, I mean, y'all know we're at a point where hard copy books don't sell particularly well between the various fundraisers and the courses they do. It's a really vibrant spot. It's really amazing stuff. And also, as we can relate, there's not a whole lot of funding for it. And so anything you've got, I mean, I know times are tight and all of that. So I'm sure even words of support or whatever would be welcome.
Or further sharing as well. I'm sure it would be appreciated.
Yeah, we'll be sharing it on our social media. So if you didn't get it here, check us out on Facebook, on Twitter. But it is in the chat, the GoFundMe link that was just posted. So thank you again, everybody, for spending your evening with us. We appreciate it. And also thanks to y'all who may have watched all the way to the ends out there in the future.
So were we going to do any of those questions? The last questions? Is that?
No, Pace wanted to peace out.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
Well, Russ, I think
I do have to run in a sec, but
so
you guys are welcome to stay on.
I'll stick around. I'm gonna duck
kick
out.
us out,
Actually, I'll be right back.
Well, should we say like
Russ.
just in case people are hanging on like for the end, should we pre-cap it at a certain time and say we're gonna go until like a certain time? Or do you want to just go?
I think let's just like go through the questions. I don't expect that. I mean, you know, if something wild shoots through the chat and there's, you know, new questions, sure. But I mean, we've got what, 3 left?
Let's go another 20 minutes. I will be right back.
I'm going to make my exit. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks you all
Russ.
for being here.
Bye, Russ.
Yeah.
Sweet dreams.
Catch you later. Thank you.
So, riffing while Pace sorts his stuff. Oh, right. I think also, sorry, just because I can't help, and it's because I'm such a toxic human being. I want to throw out that like one of the people who has thrown considerable support behind lines such as, you know, if you went to see Martin Ball and he touched your genitals or vomited on you, I don't think that qualifies as trauma or a traumatizing event. Julian Palmer, Richard Spencer apologist, ethno-state apologist,
Torpor,
self-proclaimed father of Changa, has just consistently presented a number of bad takes around what should or should not be accepted, I think, at face value. And it's just really interesting to see that the same people who are trying to create some air of, if not plausible deniability, at least sort of raising questions about the validity of even questioning these approaches, right? Saying that, oh, there's proper informed consent. If people knew what they were getting, then, you know, why would there be any issue with that? It's interesting to see the simultaneous defense of neo-Nazis, neo-fascists. I mean, Richard Spencer is literally the person who coined the term alt-right. There's a number of really disturbing stories about him. I've had extremely disturbing anti-Semitic interactions with Julian. And yeah, it's just frustrating that some of these characters keep popping up over and over and over again. Their communities know who they are. Their communities have discussed some of the problems. And because there seems to be I don't know, broader focus on trying to pretend like everything is fine and we're all good, one big happy family, there's not real engagement with that. Welcome back, Pace.
Hey, thanks. You know, there's only so long my bladder can hold out, so.
Totally. So y'all want to pick this up with the question of, I see. Maybe the best one to jump in with is Tara's question, which is the question of access is the one thing I really don't see attempted to be answered in the decrim versus legalization debates. Where do people get the drugs under decrim, under legalization? Probably commercial entities, under medicalization, therapists and doctors, under decrim, still dealers and shady practitioners.
I mean, how do people get their drugs now? I'm pretty sure that there's a global distribution network. There are adulterants in you know, press pills. There are adulterants in unidentified powders, and yet we have methods of sorting through them, right? There are chemical reagents. There are, machines. These could be community efforts. These are community efforts. They are currently, being criminalized. So, drug checking is not something that is a part of public health efforts in any city in the United States right now. And yet, if you go to Portugal, if you go to a major festival, there's sophisticated chemical analysis, equipment that is there to identify these unidentified powders.
Look, and as far as where do we get the drugs into decrim, we get them exactly where, depending on the decrim in the area. But as far as cocaine or heroin or meth or a lot of these other drugs, you get them from the same place. Cartels.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worth noting, and I know people have their own takes on this kind of reply, but like, if we're talking about, I mean, there are not insignificant numbers of people who grow and extract their own drugs currently, and it's like at the point where you remove the criminal penalty for, say, like sharing plants and fungi, like I can tell you right now that one person can grow more shrooms than they could possibly eat off of a single bulk tub, monotub, and like you got somebody in your neighborhood who grows, I don't know, a monotub that flushes 6 times, and you've got a pound plus of dried mushrooms. Like that seems easy to share and share alike. Nishay?
I'm sorry, I had a really out of context, like surprise, happy face, but Jin just gave us our first ever super chat.
That's what I
historical first. I was shocked.
Absolutely the first time anybody has
we love
thrown
you,
money at us.
and that is so cool. Yeah, we've never had that happen. I looked over and I saw the pop up, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, our first super chat."
We're not great at this.
I want to take a screenshot. That's cool. But thank you so much.
Yeah, so just to wrap up on the growing, right? So you can grow DMT containing plants, you can grow psilocybin containing fungi, you can grow Banisteriopsis caapi or muricata or sourcing Syrian rue. There's an abundance of that in the Middle East.
One can grow giant hedges of it in the American Southwest, and you can grow it in a pot, and it grows just fine very quickly.
Have you, like Syrian rue? I have
grown Syrian rue in a pot, and it's grown just fine.
Okay.
Has it produced seeds?
There you go.
That's another question, but it's not impossible.
Sure. I mean, I've grown iboga.
Problems.
Like this is all.
Yeah, iboga is a much harder plant to grow than Syrian rue. What are you talking about?
I don't know. Anyway, clearly I have problems. But the point being, right, like all of that could be grown. And yes, that doesn't address like pills, powders, the rest. But something that comes to mind is even if we ignore Portugal, right, and some of the sort of
the rest of the world does.
That's going on there. Like within the context of the US under prohibition, we've got people who are doing analysis. We've got people who are doing thin layer chromatography and reagent tests. Like we've seen collectives come together to make these tools and methodologies accessible, available, widely distributed. And I think in that context, like it's worth asking the question of, do we really think there would be less of that under a decrim model? And like, yeah, the question of going from the lab and sort of how it all gets dealt with, there are questions, but yeah, Pace.
Well, I just want to, for once, give a plug for incrementalism. Like we've lived for decades under prohibition. Let's do unprohibition. The mush rush, as it's called, to just absolutely shove through a commercialized, branded psychedelic experience, for everybody, to market the mystical. Why don't we have a gap period where things are no longer criminalized, but we're not just like greasing the rails for a commercial market? That seems like a prudence and wait and see kind of approach that says what kinds of problems Do we have what kinds of problems come from prohibition themselves or itself? People who are drug reform advocates have long said that what people attribute to addiction, to drug abuse, to gang warfare, to adulterants, that these are problems of prohibition. Remove the prohibition, but don't necessarily come charging in with with the advertising industry, actually, so that's my position. And I think we'll continue to articulate it, but at this point we're at 3 hours on, I would say, a pretty rad live stream. Like, we really appreciate everybody who's joined us and who's tuned in.
Look,
I also want to just give I was going to just say a quick shout out and thanks to Setting Sun Wellness.
Oh yeah,
That's Kyle over at Psychedelics Today.
Amazing.
Thanks for the support,
thank you so
Kyle.
much.
Kyle, amazing. Thank you. Hi, Kyle.
Final words? Yeah.
I was just going to say that the decrim conversation, I think, is going to get real interesting, because I think a lot of states are going to start to decriminalize, localities, whatever, do full decrim moving forward. And people are going to realize that, the violence in the supply chain is exactly the same. So I don't know where that's going to lead.
Well, that's a global perspective, and it's one that we continue to engage with. So I think with that, we should probably sign off, because I think that it's a broader conversation that you're pointing to, but it's one that we're committed to having.
Absolutely.
All right, this was fun. This is good.
Yeah, thanks. And if you're not subscribed, both to the channel, and we also have our mailing list that you can sign up to at symposia.com, where we will put out advance notice of future lives as we do them, and also additional updates on our reporting, etc.
Thanks again, everybody. We love it.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Be well, y'all.
Bye.